Good evening. I call the regular meeting of the Ames Area Metropolitan Planning Organization to order. The joint meeting of the Ames Human Relations Commission and the regular meeting of the Ames City Council will follow after this meeting. So good evening, Commission members. Tonight we have one item on the agenda, hearing on the final FY 2022-2025 Transportation Improvement Program. And I'll turn it over to Damien and to John. Good evening.
Thank you, Chair Gala. As you mentioned, there's only one item of business before us tonight, and that's the approval of the Transportation Improvement Program. So this program was presented to the committee in May, and then we went out for public comment. A few comments were received, and those were considered as appropriate, incorporated into the plan. It was also the time for review from our state and federal transportation partners. And a very few minor comments were requested by those agencies and incorporated into the plan. So this is pretty much the same plan that was presented to you in May.
Thank you. Questions for staff this evening? Seeing none, I'll call the public hearing on this item to be open. So is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address council? I'm sorry, the AAMPO on this topic this evening? Seeing none, I'll declare the public hearing to be closed. Any discussion between commission members? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion on resolution approving the final FY 2022 to 2025 Transportation Improvement Plan.
So moved.
City of Ames moved.
Second.
Moved by Story County. Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Okay, Policy Committee comments. Jacob, anything?
Nope.
Bronwyn?
Nothing for me, thanks.
David? Not tonight? Amber?
No.
Linda?
Yes, I do have a comment, and I'll try to keep it brief because I know there's two other meetings that come after that, but it is a transportation-related issue that I'd like to bring up right now, and that is what is the progress or lack of progress or where we are on studying the 190th and Hyde intersection. And I also bring it up because on the council agenda later tonight, Auburn Trail is there and changing the zoning there to allow development. And there's development that's going to happen north of there and development east of there. At Story County, we've been concerned for several years now about this intersection. First, I think formal correspondence we had with the city was in September of 2019. When we brought our concerns to the city, we had tried to do a stop sign there at one point, and it did not work very well. But since then, I think the city has annexed that and the entire intersection because the city annexed on the section line rather than on the road. The entire intersection lies within the city of Ames right now. Therefore, if we have concerns, what we need to do is come to the city and express those concerns. And it is simply being exacerbated with all the development that's being done in the area. Auburn Trail, as I mentioned, the new Hayden Preserve, which used to be Rose Prairie, and also some additional housing that's going on the east side of Hyde in Quarry Estates. I think I was talking to people, and I think I came up to close to 1,000 new units will be built there. They will all be in the Gilbert School District, which means all the more traffic that will be going up 190th and Hyde. Now, I realize that things happen slowly sometimes, but this is close to 2 years. What I see happening quickly is the plans for development. And I just want to make sure that we study this intersection sooner than later. I think we have a lot of intersections in that area that I just think that, and there's some in the county too, in the city, that I just think that the traffic that we're putting on these streets, our infrastructure is not up to it. And we've got to start getting ahead of it. So I was hoping that maybe there would be a little bit of time to discuss what is going on with that intersection and studying that intersection and when might we see something and how can the county help?
John or Damien, could you answer that question?
Yeah, certainly. I have some diagrams to give a summary of the planning efforts to date. So starting back in the 2040 long-range plan, you can, okay. Find that one away. I do not know. Okay. So here is the fiscal constraint plan from the previous long-range plan. It's a little bit difficult to see, but you see the dark line here. This is the only improvement in this area, which was the paving of the two, like the city did a paving project and the county did a paving project. You can see that there's no improvement intersection project that's included in that. Then 5 years forward, flash forward, we now have, as you know, our 2045 plan. So you have 25 years, each one of these plans is 25 years worth of street improvement planning. So this intersection, knowing that traffic, safety concerns, all those things accelerated this project into an intersection improvement. So the previous plan, it didn't even show up. Now it's got pretty much a 20-odd year bump in planning because it has seen excessive growth. We acknowledged it with the last plan. And what happens when you have intersection improvements like this is usually 2 years in advance of, so maybe I should indicate that what is the short term? You're probably asking, what is the short term? Well, the short term is, and I apologize for how small this is. The short term is fiscal years 2025 to 2029. So because of that, 2 years in advance, the city of Ames, who would be the sponsor of this project, has put in the CIP. So this is the current CIP sheet under the Traffic System Capacity Improvements Program, which can be found on page 108. 2 fiscal years in advance, under fiscal year 23, we have what we're calling North Growth Intersection Studies, which includes all 3 intersections on 190th. So it would be GW Carver, 190th, and US 69. They would all be studied, some preliminary design and cost estimate. And then if we need to look for grants or we need to plan for any other right-of-way acquisition, which we know at 190th and Hyde, we do not need right-of-way acquisition. We have enough space for that we can come back to council with a budget and a plan to do those things. So that's where we stand today. And again, that 2-year planning process in advance of an actual improvement for some new intersection or new street connection is very typical timeline for us.
So the study could not start until July 1, 2022 at the earliest.
Yeah, so July 1 of next year would be when we can start to
A
kick
year
off.
away from a study, and then that's in the 2025 to 2029 plan.
So, and that's only if we want to use federal aid. So we could always do it faster if we got, for instance, a safety grant through the state or some other kind of grant program. But that's one of the things that study would tell us. It would give us a cost. It would look at safety. It would look at operations and give us an idea of how competitive we could be with either a state or federal grant program.
So of the 3 intersections that are going to be studied in that, one of them is within city limits. Is that correct?
Yes, they're all within the MPO boundary.
The MPO boundary.
So you would have some partial right-of-way at 190th and US 69. So the DOT would have to be a partner with that. But then, yes, I believe other than, the one that is GW Carver 190th, I believe is all in the county.
That's all county.
Yeah. So we have some mixing of jurisdictions that we would coordinate that study with.
Okay.
But it is a study that came from the long-range transportation plan. So that's why it's an MPO.
Is there an estimate of how much that study will cost?
Well, we're budgeting $65,000 to do all 3. If you look at kind of a typical traffic impact study, they range for, let's say, one intersection is like 10 to 15 is a very normal consultant price. So that's why to make sure we cover that whole corridor, it's 65. But it's traffic analysis. We use the transportation model to forecast to 2045, see what that traffic would look like and the improvements that are needed. So whatever gets built at 190th and Hyde would essentially be able to grow into 2045 traffic.
And we don't have to do it here tonight, but I'd like to talk about what options might be available to move that study into this fiscal. And here's my concern. I think last year was schools slow or doing all virtual or whatever. I think that we didn't see the problems with that intersection that we were seeing the year before. This year, we've got schools are going to be open. Things are going to be open as usual, we're pretty sure. I think it will become a big problem very quickly. I know there was not a good accident there about a month ago. I just feel like we're, putting studying off for a year, I have concerns about. And I would like to figure out a way that we can continue discussion, not do it here because there's a whole bunch of other business here tonight, but I'd like to figure out a way we can continue a discussion on this intersection.
That's all in the city. That particular intersection's in the city only, correct? But that's also in our CIP.
Yeah, so 190th and Hyde is the intersection, the core of the intersection, the north, west, and eastbound legs are in the city. But an improvement, whether it be a signal, roundabout, whatever it would be, some overlap would happen. The southbound approach would be in the county. So the line cuts off right at like for instance, if it was a roundabout, it would be right at like the north end of like the circulating lane in the center of a roundabout. So we would have to coordinate some bit with the county to make a whole improvement at that intersection.
So as Supervisor Merkin has asked, you'd have to go back to staff to find out if there was ability to move that up, or is it appropriate for it to be moved up? Because that's in our realm, is that correct?
Well, if we're looking at reprogramming funds in the CIP, staff could put a proposal together and submit one.
So that could be brought up in council comments tonight as an option.
Yeah. Mayor, I have planned on raising this as an issue in council comments tonight.
Okay, very good.
Could I ask one simple question here? What's the current treatment at that intersection?
It's a two-way stop. So east and west is uncontrolled, north and south is a stop.
Thank you.
And just playing what if, let's just say the study was moved up or was completed by the end of this year or first part of next year, if that was decided to be done, and it was trying to accelerate the intersection, how long would it take would it take several years for that to occur? Actual improvements to that. If I understand you want to look for grants, if you wanted federal help, we have to wait to follow our plan because that's what we adopted. That's what went to the federal government, right?
Once we identify what the order of cost magnitude and the improvements that are going to be implemented, it would probably be at least one fiscal year to be able to plan, design, and build it.
Okay.
And it depends on where the end of the study lands in the construction season.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have anywhere from 12 to an 18-month kind of dynamic window, assuming you have the funds, we have a plan, we know what we're going to do.
Just one more quick question while we have you here, Damien. If we were to discuss moving up the timeline for that, how does that impact other studies that are planned or other things we've already prioritized in the work plan for traffic?
That would be part of our job in putting a proposal together, would tell council what the impacts are, both from a funding and a workload perspective.
Any further questions?
No. Just again, as I said, I look at a school year starting and I hope we can do, excuse me, something to control that intersection better before the school year starts.
In terms of temporary measures?
A temporary measure, yes. I think we need to do that. And I think that's what Council Member Garten's.
Yeah, we can look at that. I want to be a little careful. I don't know whether the rules for our discussion are the same in this setting as we have in our council comments, but I think there are some limitations on substantive conversations. Right. But I think we could ask the staff to look at those options for us.
And we also understand that the county wants to be part and parcel of that conversation also.
We would like to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're interested in all of 190th. And if the study is going to be looking at those other two intersections, the county is obviously interested in that and will be a participant in that. So I think we just need to look at that whole road there because of the way the traffic goes through there, and also the impact upon residents in the unincorporated areas and the city of Gilbert.
So in my motion and council comments tonight, I'll be looking at a couple things that you've addressed. I'll be asking that we look at partnering with the county and also looking at what measures could be done before school starts in the fall.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anything else?
No,
All right, thank you.
thank you for the
Rachel,
time. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Rachel,
Nothing tonight.
Nothing.
Gloria?
Nothing tonight.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Damien. Appreciate the information. And John, thank you for that. With that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All
Second.
right, we are adjourned. I call the joint meeting of the Ames Human Relations Commission and Ames City Council to order. Good evening, Commission members.
Good evening.
So happy to have you here. So I believe that Mr. Clinton is the chair right now. No, you're not. Oh, I'm sorry.
Jemai.
Jemai, my apologies. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first, and Deb, I'll let you take it from after Jemai introduces people. All right?
Sure.
Good evening, folks. My name is this on? I'm trying to
Yes,
yeah.
it's
Okay. All right. Good evening, folks. My name is Jemai Fisher. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the current chair for the Ames Human Relations Commission. Wayne, you want to go ahead?
And I am Wayne Clinton. I'm currently vice chair of the commission.
I'm Mother Simon. I'm one of the commission members.
And Lynette Plander.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for this opportunity tonight. This is our joint meeting with the Human Relations Commission and City Council. And Jemai will do an overview of the 2020 annual report. But I do want to make a note. The commission typically has 5 members. And so we've been going through a little bit of turnover on the commission. And we recently had Leslie Ginder, who was appointed last fall, step down for work and personal reasons. So we are in process of looking for her replacement to fill that vacancy. And we'll hopefully have that filled here in the next, maybe 3 weeks or so. So we are actively looking to get that taken care of. So I'm going to turn it over to Jemai to do the overview, and then we'll open it up for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. You should have a copy of the commission approved 2020 annual report in front of you. And first, you'll see our purpose, overview of work, mission of the commission, and how we implement the provision of the Iowa City Rights Act to provide general welfare for the citizens of Ames. I'd like to take the time to acknowledge Mrs. Jill Crosser, who served as chair through March of this year. She worked collaboratively with our vice chair, Mr. Wayne Clinton, to create this report, sharing their insights prior to leaving the commission. The Ames Human Relations Commission purpose is to study the existence of discrimination in the community and work to minimize or eliminate it, promote goodwill among the various racial, religious, and ethnic groups in the city, and cooperate with other organizations to develop programs designed to eliminate racial, religious, cultural, as well as intergroup tensions. There are a number of highlights that are outlined in the report. However, there are a few in the interest of time that I would like to focus on for your review. Despite the pandemic and its limitations, we increased our overall engagement with the community through our social media presence. Our commissioner photos and bios had over 4,000 hits on the city's Facebook page. Special thank you to Susan Guiazza for her time and assistance in this endeavor. Along similar lines of expanding our visibility and communication within the Ames community, we created a video message from the Human Relations Commission in response to reports of hatred and or discrimination by members of the Asian and Pacific Islander community here in Ames. We continued our support for city-sponsored events such as the Symposium on Building Inclusive Environments, along with the annual MLK Junior Celebration. Despite the many challenges that were brought to all of us in 2020, we did our best as a commission to be both seen and heard. As you know, we do review the cases of discrimination in partnership with Iowa Civil Rights Commission. Most of the claims in 2019 fell under employment-related concerns, as well as housing. In 2019, race and retaliation were the main themes. 2020 data shows trends in employment and public accommodation areas. There were 36 complaints in 2020. The basis for those complaints were mainly disability, retaliation, as well as sex. Currently, there are still 12 cases open, and 14 of those have been administratively closed, as shown on Figure 3. There are 5 important federal laws that protect individuals with disabilities from discrimination in employment and the job application process. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the Vietnam-era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act, and the Civil Service Reform Act. Based on data in previous years, there seems to be a notable increase in complaints to the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. Now, there could be a number of reasons for this increase. Perhaps the increase in visibility and accessibility about how to file a complaint and or circumstances brought on by that of the pandemic. Complaints related to disability and employment have increased, and we as a commission have duly noted this. I am proud of us as commissioners working well together despite the many challenges we faced. Moving forward, we are focused on increasing our visibility and have already started making strides toward this endeavor. We are dedicated to developing a shared understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our city, one that everyone can see themselves as part of. Next, you will see our updated strategic plan that we shared with you last August, which outlines our major goals and objectives. I thank you for your time, and I open the floor for any questions and comments.
Very good.
Thank you, Joy.
Jemai, I have 2 questions. If someone wants to find this report, where would they find this?
I believe it's housed on our website, correct?
Okay.
The annual report.
Yep.
Yes.
And then secondly, you mentioned that there was an increase in some of these complaints. Is it possible to add some longitudinal data so that way it helps to contextualize? So in the report, I can see the reports for 2020.
Correct.
But I don't see reports. Maybe they're here and I don't see them, but is there a place where there's longitudinal data showing how those reports have changed over time?
I would imagine that more in-depth information or context could be accessed through the Iowa Civil Rights Commission.
Okay.
I don't necessarily believe we have access to that, but maybe Deb can provide a little bit more context.
And that may be something for the next year's report to consider adding sort of a longitudinal piece to that.
Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you for your
noted.
work on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add. So one of the things that the commission did about a year ago is we had the executive director for Iowa Civil Rights Commission do a training on the complaint process and walked us through the report of a complaint and the different steps that are taken throughout the process of investigating that complaint. And one of the things the commissioners asked for was more information about those complaints, because we don't see any of the paperwork. the only data we have is what's provided to us for this report. And at that point in time, I mean, it was Executive Director Liz Johnson, and she's no longer there. She's left the organization. And she said one of the problematic issues is their system. The database that they use to collect the information and pull reports is clunky, it's antiquated, and they're hoping to replace it so they have more ability to provide more detailed information to commissioners on the types of cases that are being investigated and reported. So we're hoping for that. It's a state entity, and so they're moving at their own pace. But we are keeping an eye and continuing to inquire about accessing some more information.
Do we know if that state complaint process allows complaints in multiple languages?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and what we've done on the city's website is if they want to file the complaint, they can access the tool that we have on our website to read the information in the language that best suits the individual.
Great. I really like the videos and the biographies. I think that was a wonderful idea for personalizing the commission. What kind of plans do you have as we move out of this pandemic for more face-to-face interaction? Because we're working on outreach a lot. So you guys are key on that.
Yeah, definitely. Something that was on our radar, but the pandemic had a lot of implications. I think one of the things that we have done thus far was we had the opportunity as the commission to be part of the See Yourself in Ames as part of their DEI event. And so I sat on as a panelist, as well as Videsh and Wayne, along with myself, had the opportunity to table and talk to some of those participants just to get our faces out there and talk a little bit about what exactly it is that we do. I think one of the things that we are currently facing is a lot of folks don't necessarily know that we exist. And so it's not something that we're happy about and something that we're actively working on. And so right now we are positioning ourselves to develop those strategic partnerships throughout the city that will allow us to establish and maintain a captive audience. So folks know that we're here to support regardless of what it is that comes up as it relates to our scope as a commission.
As I was looking at the report, one of the interesting things I saw was the results of the complaints that we have, and right to sue, I assume means that it was a legitimate complaint and they found cause. So I was curious too about how that number compares to prior numbers. So not only complaints that were submitted, but how many were actually like legitimate complaints in the eyes of the code. So I was curious if you had a sense for if that number is increasing or declining, and then also just like Tim said, maybe in future reports to have that in a historical kind of graph where we could see prior ones. And then my other question was, I'm sure we probably don't get information on who the employers are or anything like that, but it just made me wish we could do some sort of education too for employers, or maybe partner with the chamber to do, and maybe they do already, educational series on employment law as it relates to these topics. So do you have a sense for if that right to sue number is greater or less than prior years? Or
I do not have that information offhand, but I could see to it that you get that information as a follow-up to this.
Sure, yeah. Just curious really if that's a number that's increasing or...
While we don't have the actual numbers, the category still, that is the one that stands out and have stood out over the last several years that I've been on the commission. The determining the aggregate number, is very challenging because we don't, as you say, receive a lot of in-depth information, and our inability to really follow up and ask more questions. A lot of times it could be just the form of individuals feeling that this is the situation and is reported. Then if there's determined there's no probable cause, then it stops there. And so we don't know if there's ever a follow-up to the individual because we don't know who they are. But somehow if there was a way that you could do that, they would at least know from a city standpoint, from the commission standpoint, that we recognize that there may be some challenges that they're dealing with, and hopefully, provide just suggestions about how to navigate that with their employer or what have you. So there are obviously some areas that I think would be nice if we had that ability.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's really something that we can really do the way it's set up now.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
I
Thank you.
And just to follow up with with a further answer to a question that you had asked regarding employer relations. So like Wayne had mentioned earlier, there's obviously some limitations that we do have, because by the time as we're receiving this information, it's already happened and we don't have much more information. But part of us trying to be a lot more visible and get further into the community, interacting with various stakeholders within the community, is to be more proactive in this regard, specifically related to the topic of disability and accommodations. A new member of our commission is someone who is very well in depth with this and some of the nuances that come along with it. And so I do anticipate that our new member will be a great asset to us during this time as we do some of that proactive work,
Good.
specifically related to some of the themes that stuck out.
Cool. Good.
Very good.
I have one other question. Have you identified any new community partners? I know it's really important for the AHRC to be partnering, and the chamber obviously is one that you've worked with, but are there others that you maybe hadn't worked with before that you're targeting now?
So there is one that was recently, a connection that was recently established with Deb was with the Ames Public Library. And so I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but we're on each other's radars, and I'm hoping that we can get something started soon. I do know that as a commission, we do plan on working collaboratively in the repainting of the sidewalk. And so for visibility purposes, as well as support purposes, when you think about what our endeavor is as a commission, it's really important to us to be involved in that way and support that community within Ames.
Other questions? Well, on behalf of council, thank you for your efforts. We know that it's we joked that it seemed like COVID scrambled everything for everybody, so we understand. And you kept on working through the pandemic. We appreciate that. And I think we take for granted what it takes to put together a strategic plan, and thank you for doing that. It was refreshing to read through it. And just had a thought. I know that you've been partnering with and are part of the building inclusive, organizations, with the chamber. And I don't know. I would just defer to maybe Deb, and you could talk to the chamber about. They're very passionate about this too. Is that maybe bringing up when you get that, as Tim and Rowan asked, for more linear data, maybe just kind of maybe that could be brought up, during that that seminar or that session, and just say, hey. Not pointing any fingers, but this is kind of a trend. We want to be aware of it. How can we be a resource? How can we be helpful? To try and help. And who knows? Maybe it could be partly because of the pandemic, what transpired, and people, tensions were high. But I don't want to excuse it. It happened, and so appreciate you bringing that, to our attention. And one of our council goals is to really be improving communication with the entire community. So I think maybe some partnerships with you as well too, to kind of really strengthen that and reach out to everyone so they all feel welcome. So with that, thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you for your efforts. And sorry you're down one person, but we'll find someone else that will be a great asset. And I guess the other question is, reaching out to students, is that something that is a focus also? Because obviously they're almost half our population, and I think we're gonna have Welcome Fest hopefully in August. Is that a plan to kind of reach out and that might be an opportunity to really improve visibility? Talk about that, Madesh, for a second.
Yes, we're planning on to be at the Welcome Fest at Iowa State, so we can be more visible to the community and the students. Reach out to just partner with Iowa State community as a whole.
And I know that the diversity and inclusion, department vice president, Reg Stewart is leaving.
Yes.
We'll find someone that will be a great addition. I'm sure they'd be willing to or interested in helping and partnering too. So, all right. Any comments that you'd like to share with us that you haven't already shared before?
And commissioners.
You're
have any
good?
Additional. Nope. I think we're good. Thank you all so
right.
much.
Any comments from the council?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All right. We are adjourned. Have a proclamation to read for Parks and Recreation Month. Whereas parks and recreation programs are an integral part of communities throughout this country, including Ames, Iowa, and whereas our parks and recreational programs are vitally important to establishing and maintaining the quality of life in our communities, ensuring the health of all citizens, and contributing to the economic and environmental well-being of community and region. And whereas parks and recreation programs build healthy, active communities that aid in the prevention of chronic disease, provide therapeutic recreational services for those who are mentally or physically disabled, and improve the mental and emotional health of all citizens. And whereas parks and recreation programs increase the community's economic prosperity through increased property values, expansion of the local tax base, increased tourism, attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction. And whereas the U.S. House of Representatives has designated July as Parks and Recreation Month, and whereas Ames recognizes the benefits derived from parks and recreation resources, therefore I, John A. Hala, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim the month of July 2021 as Parks and Recreation Month. And here to accept the proclamation is our Director of Parks and Rec, Keith Abram.
So thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Council. This year's theme is called Our Parks and Recreation Story. And I could stand up here and spend hours, if not days. I know I won't, talking about all the different stories that Parks and Recreation has developed over the years. Could be from individuals or families that meet at a program or in the park and become lifelong friends and spend a lot of time together. We have people that have come to our programs and have improved their health and either slowed down or reversed chronic diseases. And I could go on and on with it, but I think one of the things, and I will end with one story here, but I want to thank Council, our Parks and Recreation Commission, City Manager, and the rest of our staff. We don't do this alone. We have a lot of people that are involved, but the support that we have received for parks and recreation and quality of life activities in the city of Ames is tremendous. And I know we don't always hear those good stories, but there are an awful lot of them. And the last story I just want to end with, I think if most people have been up to Innis Grove with the Miracle Park, the Barnes Family Inclusive Playground, and the Rotary Club of Ames Miracle Field. So this spring, we did have our first Miracle League that we started, and for individuals with disabilities. And it was one of the things in the first game, there was a 10-year-old who was getting ready. He's in the dugout. He's ready to bat. He's got his bat up. He's ready to go. And the coach calls his name to go up and bat, and he turns to his mom and he says, "Mom, miracles do happen." And it's just tremendous when we're in a community that puts so much emphasis on parks and recreation and all those good things that happen. So I want to thank again the mayor, commission for this proclamation, and for the community of Ames and the residents that keep bringing forth ideas and providing support to make things happen. So thank you so much, and have a great evening.
All right, moving on to consent agenda. Council, does anyone wish to pull any item this evening in the consent? Hearing none, entertain a motion to approve consent.
Moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to public forum. This is a time that we set aside for comments from the public on topics of city business other than those listed on the agenda. And is there anyone this evening that wants to address council? You're welcome to. John, please come forward, and ask you to try and limit your comments to 3 minutes. So if you introduce yourself and your address, and you may begin.
I'll do my best. Thank you. Council, Mayor, my name is John Wolseth. I live at 902 Arizona Avenue. I'm here tonight as part of a coalition of organizations that include the Ames NAACP and various faith-based organizations in Ames, including Ames Immigration. Our group has been meeting regularly for the past several months since the release of the Ames policing report by the city manager and the then interim chief of police. We appreciate that the city has taken an important first step in clarifying the kinds of police-community relationships that fit within the values of the city as outlined in the Excellence Through People organizational goals. We understand that the policing report is an alignment of those goals and wish to support this through dialogue and research. We believe any changes in policing are so important that significant community input should be included beyond the kinds of forums that have been held in the past. We advocate for community workshops that begin by informing participants of the legal, budgetary, and political constraints of changing policing in Iowa. With this as a foundation, community members could help shape the direction of policing in Ames. Understanding that this may not occur, we will use the public comment period at council to share our findings and keep policing at the forefront of council's mind. We will begin with recommendation number 16 of the October 2020 report, creating an Ames Resident Police Advisory Committee. The National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, also known as NACOL, is the leading national organization that advocates for transparency in policing and building trust in community through civilian oversight. They provide resources, trainings, and technical assistance for oversight boards, city staff, and elected officials. NACOL is a powerful resource in helping guide discussions on oversight for cities of all sizes. If the city of Ames is not yet a member, we believe that the $400 per year investment at the beginning of the process of defining the parameters and structure of the Ames Resident Police Advisory Committee would be money well spent. Further, we feel it would be prudent for members of council to read the 2016 guideline for the implementation of new or revitalized police oversight that can be found on their website. I have links that I will send to you after the meeting. Finally, there are a number of free webinars available to the public. Since it corresponds with many parts of the October report, including recommendation number 12 on publishing use of force statistics, the recording of the January 2020 webinar, Analyzing and Reporting Use of Force Statistics, may be an interesting place to start. I appreciate your time, and this evening, we will continue to share some guiding principles as we move forward through the next several weeks. Hopefully you won't get tired of seeing me. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll close public forum. Moving on now to item 24, staff report on 12th Street and Duff Avenue pedestrian crossing. Damien and John.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have a staff report that's a response to a city council referral of a request that was made by McFarland Clinic regarding the pedestrian crossing at 12th Street across Duff. So Damien can give a background and then go over some of the options that were looked at.
Thank you. So starting off, you can see at the beginning of the report, tried to give a summary of the issues that were brought up in McFarland Clinic's letter. I'm not going to touch on them right now in any specific detail, but really I think one of the things I wanted to get, and the reason why we're coming back with a staff report is because these issues would be very something reflective of something if we were doing like a corridor study. If we were looking at Duff Avenue from 10th to 13th Street and we're trying to do an issues map, kind of these bullet points are looking at it. So when you're looking at, when we're going through all the options that are in the report, they're trying to address some of the themes that are in the bullet point and consolidate them into potential directions that you could give staff to move forward with an actual improvement. So when you're looking at these options, please keep in mind that they're not fully cooked. There are probably some more studying that needs to be done, more specificity needs to be taken. But depending on the range of direction that council gives to staff, obviously our amount of work that we put into it would reflect what council is looking for. So before we go too far down any one path, that's what this study and the staff report's really trying to do, is get direction on that. So I think most people are familiar with the section of Duff by the hospital. Back in around or before 2013, there were some changes into that hospital medical campus with adding some additional buildings. The clinic at the time approached the city and we put a rectangular rapid flashing beacon in. So right now on the north side of 12th Street, I think I have an issues map. There we go. Let me get this all in one shot. So you can see we have there's an existing traffic signal at 13th Street. There is a signal at 11th Street, which goes into the main hospital campus on the west. And then 12th Street being the intersection in the middle. This driveway here, if you can see where my mouse is where the ambulances come out. So on the north side of that intersection is where that crossing improvement was put in back in 2013. And that was due to a high volume of staff crossing back and forth. And obviously, depending on the time of day and the conditions of traffic on Duff Avenue, it could be pretty difficult. So the solution at the time was thought that we could, because the rectangular rapid flashing beacon was a fairly new, it still is somewhat in an experimental status. Unfortunately, Federal Highway takes a very long time to move anything out of experimental status. So it's still somewhat it's in that, even though it's widely accepted as an improvement. We have several locations in town that we have it in various conditions, by the way. So this, I should point out, is probably the least ideal condition. We have one that is the most ideal, which is on Dakota, just north of the hospice house. When you have a single lane and a median barrier, that's probably the best location. There's another location kind of one step down from that, which would be by North Loop and South Loop. There's a median break, but it's still 4 lanes of traffic. And then here we have 5 lanes of traffic with driveways. So this is probably the most complex, most confusing. If you're looking at having to get people to pay attention, as we know drivers have trouble paying attention depending on what they may be doing, this intersection, this configuration can be one of the more complicated. So one of the issues that was brought up in the letter was the speed along the segment by the campus. What is important to point out is we didn't do a study with actual engineering level radar detection. We used our streetlight data. This is a location-based services from App Data. I think we presented to council that license when that was bought a while back. What it does do is it gives us a really good relative metric. And what my takeaway from this when we looked at the data is somewhat concerning that it is trending up. But when we looked at the hourly data, it's really related to congestion. So the least congested the corridor, the more the average speeds go up. So what you're kind of seeing in 2020 and 2021 is kind of obvious. When we have effects of COVID and you have less congestion, less people going to work on a daily basis, you're probably going to see averages trending up a little bit because congestion would help mitigate that. And I didn't provide all the data sets we looked at, but when you look at hourly data, peak hour, even today, current conditions, peak hour it does go back down, but it's the rest of the day that's bringing that average back up when congestion isn't there. So there is some concern about the speed and where it's trending. I think we probably need to keep an eye on that as things return more to normal. So the first option that we looked at, so if the complexity of the street, the context is something that maybe we wouldn't install, or if we were coming today before council and asking what kind of improvement would staff recommend, it probably wouldn't be the same kind of improvement that's there now. A little bit of this conversation happened, as council may remember, when we looked at the PED study along Lincoln Way. There was probably a lot of locations where pedestrians were wanting to cross. However, we were trying to trying to encourage them to go to certain locations, being the signals, discourage them from crossing in the mid-block. When you look at the street segment, maybe I can bring up the concept that we put together. So if this crossing location is important to maintain, so that's really what that first option is looking at. Like, we need to keep the pedestrian crossings at this location. What would be the safest or the most effective way to give the pedestrian protection, to give them priority, would be to close off the westbound approach of 12th Street, close off any unnecessary, I'll make this bigger so we can see it. Close off any unnecessary driveways that might be in the area. So we're restricting vehicle access. We're providing a refuge median, very similar to what I was talking about on Dakota Avenue, and then we would install a hybrid beacon. So a hybrid beacon is a pedestrian operated signal that would actually stop traffic versus the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which only reminds drivers to yield to pedestrians. Kind of wish Iowa was not a yield state and a stop state, but that is a legislative issue that we can address tonight. So the issue that you might be asking, well, why do I have to close off 12th Street to put in a hybrid beacon? Well, so a hybrid beacon sequence goes flashing yellow, then it goes to all red, and then releases pedestrians east and west. And after the walk sequence is done and it goes into flashing don't walk, the red lights on the top go into a wig-wag sequence. And what is legally allowed at that point is for north-south traffic to go, and they still have to yield the pedestrian, but they can treat the hybrid beacon like a stop sign. So side street traffic, what do they see? They see essentially nothing. So they have yielding traffic on north and south, and side street traffic is trying to mix in, and they would have a stop sign. So it's not that it's not illegal. It is allowed in certain circumstances. The MUTC does allow driveways. What they recommend is low volume, and it usually has a fairly high threshold of engineering study and judgment to put a hybrid beacon at a location where you have a side street access or a driveway access. So you have to be very cautious when and why you do it. So the reason why staff is proposing, if we're trying to provide a stop protection for pedestrians, we need to limit vehicular access. So essentially the best way to think about this is we're creating a mid-block where a mid-block doesn't exist. So that was if the direction that we get from council is to try and I should mention, we knew this would be somewhat controversial. So we sent out a mailing to everyone in the 11th to 13th Street that fronts Duff and fronts Carroll. So it was a lot of the Mary Greeley, the medical buildings, and the residents. No one likes this plan. No one wants to restrict access. They're already somewhat concerned about the traffic related to some of the changes that have happened in recent history. They fear that closing the street will force more traffic down onto Carroll. So if we do acknowledge that an actual traffic study where we would look at how traffic would be rerouted would need to be done before this becomes a feasible option. It's obviously the most expensive option, so we'd have to come back with a plan and a budget to present to council. But we didn't want to do all that effort to find out it's untenable to the public, and council doesn't want to go down this path. So that's what option one entails. And it's probably the most complicated one, which is why I spent the most time discussing it. Option two is essentially maintain existing conditions. So I think it is very important to recognize that when a pedestrian gets hit, this is a very appropriate response. We can't ignore it. We need to look at it. We need to address the issue. However, 8.5 years to have one pedestrian strike. I did look at the crash history. All the other accidents in that 8.5-year period were property damage only. The one pedestrian involved accident that resulted in an injury was the one that essentially sparked this report. So when you look at comparable locations where you might have pedestrian accidents, you would say that in 8.5-year history, that's a relatively low amount. Now, every community is going to have a certain threshold for what they think is acceptable. And I think that's why that option is in here. And we can discuss it tonight. If it's too much, that threshold of one accident is too much, there's different ways we could take that. One would be option 1, where we make pedestrian the priority. And then the other option would be option 3, which is somewhat that's why I bring up the discussion of what we talked about on the pedestrian study that went through campus. Because we realized and acknowledged that we can't accommodate where pedestrians want to walk in every location along an arterial. What we need is a reasonable distance for where the next safe crossing can be. And so when we looked at it, if you looked at, in some of the things we implemented along Lincoln Way, I'll remind council, was the leading pedestrian interval, which stopped traffic in all directions and let the peds go first. Those I should have put that in the report, I apologize, but those are some of the options that could be done at the signals, similar to what we did in Campus Town. But if it is giving a false sense of security to pedestrians, and I said, is one accident enough? Is 3 accidents enough? It's very hard to say. Every community will decide differently what threshold they think that it's time to do something different. So option 3 is removing it because we feel that the rectangular rapid flashing beacon in a 5-lane section without any other way to break up that crossing of pavement is unsafe. What I can tell you from a data perspective is that one crash in 8.5 years is relatively low. But pedestrian crashes, especially ones involved with unattended drivers, are very random. They're hard to predict. It's really a driver behavior issue. It's not an infrastructure issue. So they're kind of hard. They are hard issues to solve with an engineering solution. An engineering solution that would affect distracted drivers needs to be like an order of magnitude higher. So for me to affect a driver's attention, I have to make a very extreme restriction. And that's why you see option 1, where we're closing off a street, we're adding in a signal, things like that. Probably one of the things I think that should mention, both in the feedback from McFarland Clinic and some of the residences, they were asking about signalizing 12th Street. I think you saw that as an option. To do a traffic signal at 12th Street would require a study, a warrant study. Typically, all things considered, as your traffic engineer, I would come back and tell you that 425 feet is less than 1/8 of a mile. So 1/8 of a mile is an absolute minimum for adding signals. They don't work well. You can't get progression at that distance. The best example I can give you is Sheldon and Highland. It'd be kind of like that. You'd have really tight signals that never quite coordinate in one direction. And if you have an overwhelming amount of pedestrians like we do in campus, you can kind of, quote, get away with it. But in areas where you have very low pedestrian volumes and maybe higher traffic volumes, and you should focus on having good coordination so that you don't result in vehicle crashes, it's not recommended. So traffic signal spacing is between 660 feet and 1320. So that's an 1/8 of a mile and a 1/4 mile is recommended. So we're very far below that threshold currently out there.
In that bulleted list you showed at the beginning that sort of looked like a brainstorming of ideas, there were 2 on the bottom of the list. One to reduce the speed in that zone to 25. Then there was another one about adding another one of those things where it tells you the speed you're going, like as is south of there. Can you maybe touch on the validity of those, or why those weren't suggested as options, or if they would be something that you would consider?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we might be able to get council direction on future work, and that's what I was talking about in some of the existing conditions, is that we are very close on the threshold. So anytime, maybe it could go back to when we come back to council with speed studies, we try and look at what is an amount of threshold that we can lower speed limit or control speed limit before we have to get into higher traffic calming measures, like more prescriptive ones. So when you looked at the speed, and that's where I think we would need to do a study, because our street light data is an 85th percentile and an average that is right around that 25, 26 range for the average, and then the 30, which is the posted speed limit. So if we lowered it to 20, our 85th percentile would be around 30 miles an hour if all things stayed the same, which is in that range where if it was posted 25 today, we probably could manage that amount of excessive speeding with dynamic feedback signs. So we probably could get away with, and that's where I would want to verify with actual counters first. Like, so that was one of the options, is we could do a speed study. Look, can we lower the speed limit without creating an artificial speed differential? Because that's really the thing that I'm always concerned about, is lowering the speed limit for the sake of lowering the speed limit and not implementing enough measures to bring it down with it. So, but the good thing is the natural speed of this, mainly related to the congestion of Duff Avenue, is in that range where we probably could get away with dynamic feedback signs. But I would want real data, not location service data from apps, which is what this data is.
So another option would be potentially do a study with that in mind. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so one of the options I would say is we could do a speed study looking at the feasibility of dropping the speed limit in that hospital medical zone to 25.
Okay.
So essentially from 13th Street down to 10th Street.
Okay, thanks.
Before we start getting any more questions, is there anything else you wanted to use or close your presentation, and we'll go into council comments or questions?
No, certainly. So I just wanted to outline the options. And like I said before, they are not complete ideas. It's more of what direction do we want to take the corridor? And obviously, I don't think we're at the level where we want to do a full-blown corridor study. So we're trying to address the issue of 12th Street and how do we set priorities and what direction do we take it. So I'm open to any questions we might have.
Questions and comments?
I do have one other question. When I read McFarland Clinic's original letter to us, they had spec'd out what I would describe as an improvement in the rectangular flashing beacon with more modern technology, more or less, maybe some additional lights as well on the street. And I don't see that addressed in the staff report. Could you just comment about that particular suggestion?
Sure. So the idea was that we needed advanced warning. So the only time that I would recommend that we do, so here is a Google Street View. And I went out and I looked at, drove the corridor several times, trying to catch a pedestrian crossing. And the good thing is they all push the button. I don't think I ever catch a pedestrian not using the improvement. So let's say somebody was excessively speeding, which starts at 40 miles an hour. It's posted at 30, 10 is excessive. That would mean for stopping sight distance, I calculated it, we would need to be able to see that beacon at least 250 feet down the road. And you can see these flashing lights far in excess of 250 feet. So when you look at the corridor, the further you get away, if you had advanced flashers, you would be seeing a lot of flashing lights. The point of the advanced flasher is really when you're coming around a curve, if you were to come upon an intersection. Whereas here, you're going to see advanced flashers and the flasher. And what are we telling the vehicle at that point? Do you stop at the advanced flasher? Do you stop at the crossing? I think that it would be more confusing and add to more data, essentially more decision-making that a driver would have to figure out, what are we trying to tell me as a driver? And I don't believe we would get any safer, especially if that driver is unattentive. In the first place, an additional flasher is probably not going to get their attention. So that's why it wasn't addressed, because the purpose of that advanced flasher is on a curve.
Thank you.
I have a few questions related to our complete streets plan and how this question fits in with that.
Sure.
So as I understand our complete streets plan, we are creating those areas of priority where some are priority ped, some are priority biking or priority car or public transport. So what would you identify Duff as if you had to name it? What do you think the priority of this street is?
Well, I think if I remember right, it would be either the avenue or mixed use avenue in the complete street plan. which probably had the most dynamic range of improvements that you could have. But I think what's important is that it should have ped facilities, it should have vehicular facilities, it should have bus facilities, it should have all mode facilities. And when we looked at the amount of traffic that's on this right now, we're about 11,000 ADT, which a 3-lane section, for instance, could go up to perhaps 18,000 ADT. So really, you are looking a little bit of a legacy design. Like if we had to build this street again today with the current configuration, we might not build a 5-lane section. This is more of what you might see in a commercial district, perhaps, I mean, like South Dove, or some other higher volume traffic where you're getting into the 30 to 40,000 ADT with a lot of turning movement. So the only thing that we're really getting here is turning movement. So we would likely to have, and we don't have enough, so under the mixed-use avenue, there's buffers and protections for bikes, there's buffers for pedestrians, you would have more planting. So if we were to rebuild the street, I would think that we should really take a serious look at when the street comes up for construction, what do we do with it? That's a little bit to why the staff report is the way it is today, because we're not ready to do that level of project. But I would say from a complete street opportunity perspective, there's a lot of changes that could be done to make this more pedestrian friendly. And when I looked at the long range plan, the 2045 volume, I believe only goes to maybe a 13 or 14,000 ADT. So we're not trying to accommodate a 30,000 ADT number in this area. So there is some opportunities that, yeah, maybe in the peak hour we would have a little congestion, but throughout the day we could make the swap and make it more pedestrian, more bike friendly, and perhaps have better transit stops along the way too.
So I think you probably just answered the other question. We did get an email asking, well, why aren't we looking at blocking off one of the lanes on either side, creating some bike lanes and trying to put the road on a road diet?
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's something that we would have to consider farther down the road, if I can use that, because of the cost and the intricacies involved in the whole project, because it's Duff Avenue.
Well, and I think that I can't recall the last time we reconstructed the street, but 13th Street down to 10th Street, if let's say that was our area of interest, it would be a fairly expensive project to redo this arterial street. So I think just like maybe the best analogy of recent memory is we had an opportunity to reconstruct Welch. We spent a lot of time talking with the community about what changes we want to make. I think when we get ready to do this section of Duff, we could do something similar.
So whatever we do now is not necessarily the end of the discussion for this area, given the complete streets plan and the things that we could be considering in the future.
And that's why if there's some overabundant of a caution that you see in the staff report about we're not trying to commit to any one direction, it may be most related to that, knowing that we're not trying to inflate this into a large project at this time.
So then I guess the other question I have is, do you think that that location is an appropriate location for a ped crossing, knowing what we know about the traffic?
It's hard to say. I mean, it seems that it is, but you also have somewhat of a desire line because of the street. So 12th Street creates any mid-block to any core campus area is probably going to be a point. So I would think that it makes logical sense that between 13th Street, which will always be there, and the main entrance into the hospital campus, that something along this direction needs to happen. I think the other thing that we touched on, but I didn't get direct feedback from, would be, does the ambulances need something to help them stop traffic? Anecdotally, it seems like everyone obviously yields appropriately to an ambulance when they're coming out. So I haven't witnessed any issues that they have, but that doesn't mean that not only the pedestrian crossing, but the ambulance bay would also benefit from something. So you could get like a synergy there.
Thank
but
you.
That decision, I would hope that if we did the project and we had a public meetings, we work with Mayor Greeley and the hospital, the McFarland Clinic and the hospital, that they together would give feedback as to where they think pedestrians ought to be, if it's not in this location.
Okay.
Another question? just based on reading the material that was provided to us, it really reads as if the pedestrians are primarily employees going back and forth between different parts of their campus. So my question is, has there been any discussion of, say, a pedestrian bridge that's particular to that population that actually needs to do that on a regular basis?
No, we have definitely not gotten to that level. We haven't identified who the people are that's crossing, but yes, it seems like it's mainly staff going between buildings. And I guess I couldn't speak to like a grade separated crossing. That's definitely not been on staff's radar to look at.
Sure. But that's something that it's conceivable, right? I mean, there's nothing that makes it impossible other than cost.
Other than cost.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Other questions, comments? Damien, on your option 1, can you go back to that for a second?
Sure.
I just had a couple of questions for you on the, I understand that eliminating the 12th access, and I think I heard you say that it's the distracted driver is the, I'm sorry, the plan. If you could go.
Oh, sure.
It really, it's a matter of potentially distracted, excuse me, people not paying attention. That how do you get their attention? And so you had shown like you had that image where you have the flashing red lights or the yellow light, and you said the reason you wouldn't go with that is because going from 12th onto Duff, they would have a stop sign. Is it possible to integrate just a solid red light that would be for people going westbound on 12th, for sake of discussion, that they would be controlled and they'd be a flashing red light like a stoplight or stop sign? But if that was solid red, that they would have to stop to try and prohibit that, because it seems, and I'm not advocating for one or the other, but the point is, if we're trying to get distracted drivers, it needs to be pretty big, it seems like. But just a question.
No, it's a very good point. So we have a project that was identified in the long range plan in our bike ped portion to have Clark Street be a parallel corridor to Grand Avenue. And one of the improvements was crossing 13th Street. So we have in the CIP a hybrid beacon at 13th and Clark. So it is a hybrid beacon, but it is split across the intersection like a signal. And the traffic volume on Clark mainly turns. So there is very few people from our data that are going through trying to go across 13th Street. The way we're handling that, we worked with the Iowa DOT, and they did a trial installation in Cedar Rapids. So we talked to the Cedar Rapids traffic engineer and the Iowa DOT traffic safety office, asked them what they did, and we are following their lead on how that's done. We don't have experience here in town. So the way we're handling that is we have do not enter, dynamic do not enter signs, and we have additional signs that are dark until that hybrid beacon happens, and then those signs are lit. Mm-hmm. It is somewhat of a risk. I think what we're trying to do at 13th and Clark, because we don't need to deal with high traffic volumes, we don't have driveways and other sorts of things, that we felt like that was a reasonable location to test a hybrid beacon at a driveway / street intersection. Because we don't have experience with it, I don't feel comfortable doing it here, making that same recommendation here. But yes, that is how you would handle it, is you have to say, do not enter. So essentially, the trial that will happen at Clark is that north and southbound traffic, while the hybrid beacon is working, you have to sit there. And that's somewhat of what we're trying to figure out, is the tolerance of a vehicle to sit and not violate the do not enter sign. And we'd have to, if it doesn't work, we would probably not want to replicate that in other locations in town.
So if you could control people from going from 12th onto Duff and keep that connection from 12th to Duff open, would you feel more comfortable with that hybrid beacon? Would you feel more, and if it is successful, more comfortable recommending that here also? Or is it's other extenuating circumstances that would say, no, there's still other issues that are of concern?
I would think if we had empirical evidence that drivers it works for that side street traffic to be controlled by dynamic messaging, like we're going to do at 13th and Clark, and we had a 2 or 3 year history where it was clear that all, not just local residents, but people traveling through that intersection do what we expect and want them to do. I think the reason why you're seeing a closing of the street here is because we don't know that. And I'm not sure that this issue can wait for us to kind of figure out and build an empirical data set on 13th and Clark. So until we have actual experience with that crossing, then I would say no, I'm not comfortable recommending it, but it is an option.
And then is a flashing speed sign saying your speed is thus and so, you're going too fast. Is that something that does get, because again, we're trying to take care of the distracted driver. Is that something which is proven to work to help get people's attention?
Our data, because we do kind of before and after internal reviews, some locations work better than others. The one in Stang seems to work probably one of the better locations that I've seen, even though I'm sure anecdotally some people might not agree with it. But one of for instance, the one on Ontario, I've had some mixed data set, but for the most part, because it has a flasher in it, because it is giving them a sign, it's right on top of a speed regulatory sign. It seems like it is, it actually influences traffic, but again, only in that maybe plus or minus 5 mile an hour range. If we're in like the 10 or 15, then clearly there's something else going on. And other than fear of enforcement, they're not going to follow those signs.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and open up public input on this item. I have one individual who is interested in addressing council. Is there, just a second please, is there anybody else that's interested in addressing council tonight on this? Okay, Grant, please come forward and introduce yourself and give your address, and then you may proceed. And if you could try and limit your comments to 3 or 4 minutes, I'd appreciate it.
My name is Grant Olson. I live at 3812 Ontario Street. I live in the area that was mentioned that does have a dynamic feedback sign. It does indicate miles per hour up until once you reach 5 miles per hour, it says too fast, slow down. And even though you're giving a driver information, really it only matters if the driver cares to slow down. And so what you really need to have is self-enforcing infrastructure. It can be something as simple as a raised crosswalk. If you've been on the Iowa State campus near the main business building, there is a raised crosswalk, which means that the pedestrian does not have to change elevation from one sidewalk to the other sidewalk. It is the cars who have to slow down if they don't want to cause damage to their vehicle. It's self-enforcing infrastructure. And tonight, what might the McFarland employee who was hit by a roughly 3,000-pound vehicle say? Were they thrown to the ground? How painful was the road rash? Did they break any bones? How long did it take them to recover? When I'm going out and about, sometimes I drive a car, and sometimes I walk to where I'm going. Pedestrians are some of the most vulnerable users of streets. Pedestrians like me, we have no hard shell that has a collision rating. Let's look at the options. Option number 3 is remove the current flashing beacon and direct pedestrians at 12th to walk a block north, cross the street, walk another block back to the point across the street where you wanted to get to. That's a decrease in equity. That's not equity. Option number 2 is maintain the existing conditions, which sadly resulted in a person getting hit by a vehicle. Which leaves option number 1, or something similar, such as a raised crosswalk. The choice is clear if you care about vulnerable users of streets, pedestrians, such as the healthcare worker who was struck and injured at the crossing. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close public input. Council?
So I'll start. I drive this stretch of road every day since this has been put in place. And I echo Damien's point that one pedestrian injury in 8.5 years is a remarkable safety record. When I see the yellow light, I observe the cars slowing down. There's ample visibility to see the pedestrian cross. So I would suggest that we continue what we have. We can't allow a single injury, although it is unfortunate, to drive our traffic decisions. So we have to balance. We don't have the luxury of looking at just one side of the equation. We have to also consider the traffic and moving people around. I think the road diet idea is going to be a hard sell for the many people who use this, but that's really not on our plate today. But I think we should maintain the status quo.
I actually have a question. Was that a motion, Tim, or was that just discussion?
I was just throwing that out.
Okay, so related to Tim's question, if Tim made the motion that we leave this in place, are there things that we can do in addition to this, like additional signage for pedestrians, so that they are more aware? I don't know what the signage is there. I haven't ever tried to cross. So is it just the beacon? Or is there an additional sign that says cars may not slow down? Is there something like that that could supplement what's already there that is not going to change the dynamic of the speed and all of that that's necessary to keep the traffic moving?
So right now, the signage is the typical signage you would see on the button that tells you how to use the crossing, the RRFB. We could certainly add something that reminds pedestrians to not proceed until they see the traffic has either slowed or come to a stop. We can add that reminder to the current infrastructure.
I know that when I'm traveling and in the UK, I find it very helpful when I see things on the pavement that say, look left, or, signs for the unaware that this could be a dangerous intersection. And so I wonder if that might be enough for the time being until we actually look at Duff in a complete streets way to make it safer.
But I think that these are by and large employees of McFarland and Mary Greeley who use this intersection pretty frequently. I don't know. I guess I would assume they know how to use the equipment.
I would say it might be users of those facilities too, though, which could be out of towners or, perhaps people who haven't, if they are from out of town and visiting facilities across the street, they might not be used to such an urban setting, maybe too. So maybe it might help to educate. I'm wondering, I would leave it in there. I'm not in favor of removing that treatment, but I am curious about what it would take to do a speed study specific to that area. I think that sounds kind of promising to consider moving the speed limit down to 25 there and see if we can affect any change with that, more so than, I think the option about closing off 12th Street, it's clearly disliked by both the neighbors and the facilities there. So I don't think we should pursue that, but I would like to do something. So I guess that's,
Okay.
See what others think and then maybe make a motion to that effect.
Other comments, or else get a motion?
I do have a question, Damien. You mentioned the leading pedestrian indicator that we've deployed, for instance, at Welch Avenue and Lincoln Way. My personal observation of that is suggested it actually makes a difference. And so, first of all, do we have that facility at the actual pedestrian crossings with red lights at 13th Street and 10th Street as well, or 11th?
I believe all of our controllers that we have out are modern enough to implement leading pedestrian intervals. So we could make that change even without council direction. We could just do it.
Okay, and so that is there any reason not to explore that and do that if necessary? I'm just imagining what this is something that we could do that might improve safety for people who do choose to look at the street, these 5 lanes of traffic, and say, I'm going to walk a block.
Sure, and really the only The only risk is extremely low. It would be that maybe we have to retime some of the signals. I think council remembers that's what we did in Lincoln Ways. We retimed them, provided the little bit of extra time we might have lost by providing a lead-in pedestrian interval. But in my opinion, some of that is somewhat moot by the ITS program, because Duff Avenue corridor is going to be the first fiber optic traffic adaptive corridor we have money for. We're in the design of. We're going to build or start construction on it next year, which would be this corridor, Duff, all the way over to Dayton. So we're going to modernize all these signals, and we should see a significant increase in efficiency right out of the gate. And so I don't see any reason why, but that doesn't mean that I have to wait for construction. We can start the LPI right now and then get further efficiency gains when the ITS program goes in.
Thanks.
So I have some interest in Bronwyn's idea as well. I drive this corridor several times a day as well. My husband actually is an employee at Mary Greeley who parks across the street and walks across stuff every day. So I don't know that the compliance, although it's anecdotal, in my experience is as high as we might think it is with vehicles stopping for the flashing beacon. Would a speed study also gather data on vehicle compliance with?
No, because and actually that's something I don't think the industry has a good. It's really difficult to, even through video, you have to have an observer out there, like essentially counting and making a judgment call whether somebody saw and yield properly to pedestrian. But we would definitely know very accurate speed data. We would know time of day data. Location-based services that are in the streetlight data is like I said, from an app and a phone. So you're somewhat beholden to GPS speed accuracy. So at least we would know, could we start by changing the speed limit on the street and perhaps getting some of the change in the feel of the corridor to start that change. But we would want to verify so that we're not creating an artificial speed differential and we have rear ends and things like that. So, because I don't want cars looking in the rearview mirror worried about getting hit and not looking at the crosswalk. So.
Right.
There's no more comments. I would entertain a motion.
Move option 2.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion, and that doesn't mean we can't have a second option or second motion on the study as well. Unless you want to do a friendly amendment.
Well, might explain what option 2 is.
So go ahead.
Sure. Option 2 is to maintain existing conditions and continue to monitor safety.
Good.
I guess so I'm going to hold out for a speed study option on this one.
Well, are those two mutually exclusive?
I think maintaining existing conditions, I don't know. I consider that as a different option, I guess, a speed study.
Let me bring up something. So I don't know what type of enforcement that you've discussed with the police department, but do you think that we can maybe have police do extra enforcement and then get a report back on what they're seeing before we pursue a speed study?
Yeah, I guess that's.
I mean, if we have police out there, monitoring things more frequently, and we find through their data that,
that's all right.
I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't necessarily want to jump ahead of something.
I think, I mean, my impression with police doing monitoring is that it improves things for a while, right? Until they quit doing it. And
it's
then
definitely
it goes back
effective
to
while
the way-
they're there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, it'll slow them down. Yeah, I guess I would still like to do the speed study, but.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor for option 2 and a second. Everyone understand the motion? Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Is there anything else, Barbara?
Yeah, I'd like to move that we direct staff to do a speed study on this section of road.
I'll second.
All right, moved and seconded. Discussion?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what's the intended outcome of this, because what I think I understood Damien to be saying that the overall speeds are pretty much consistent with the posted limits. So what do we hope to learn here?
So we're hoping to learn if traffic would comply if we moved it down to 25.
The way I would put it is you could direct staff to do a speed study to see whether or not a 25 mile an hour speed zone would be feasible in this hospital medical zone.
Yeah. Because you can move the speed limit down, and if people comply, it's effective. If people wouldn't comply, then it wouldn't be effective and we wouldn't do it.
If we find that the speeds are such that with some minor reinforcement, encouragement, traffic calming measures that we know are effective, that we could lower it without creating a secondary safety issue, would be what the study would look at. Like unintended consequences of lowering it to 25.
And what is the time commitment for that study and the cost of a study like that?
Well, we would just work it into our staff time. It probably would take conservatively 2 weeks, hopefully less. And then really if we just for just argument's sake, that the only thing that comes out of it is an ordinance and a dynamic feedback sign, it's around 8,000 to 9,000 for a pair of dynamic feedback signs. And then the amount of time it takes to do an ordinance change. And I don't know, half a dozen signs at $50 a piece.
A dynamic feedback sign could be installed without changing the speed limit as well, right?
You could do one right now at 30 miles an hour. Yeah. There is a pair down in the Old Town District just south of here at 30 a mile an hour.
So I'm trying to figure out, sort of in David's point, what we're trying to accomplish. If we have a corridor that has a very solid safety record, then I'm all on board. Let's figure out what's going on there. But here we have ample data that this is a very safe area. So I'm trying to understand what we're gaining by this.
Well, I would say that already during congested times, traffic moves at about 25 miles an hour anyway. So you're not putting people out too much to move the limit down to 25. Because only in times of low congestion are people really speeding through there anyway. So people manage as is going 25 in that corridor sometimes. Might as well change the limit to that so that you bring the overall average down, if that's in fact what the traffic study would show.
And I would point out too, there's a pretty high volume of police cars there anyway, just because it's a main corridor. So for reference, if you really wanted to speed, this would not be the place you'd want to try the names.
Everyone understand the motion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried.
I would also like to move that we put some enhanced pedestrian signage at the site of the beacon to encourage the pedestrians to watch more carefully.
Is there a second? Motion died. Lack of second. All right.
Sorry, I just don't think the onus is on the pedestrians in that one. So
I don't care who the onus is on. I figure the more information there is, if you can stop somebody from stepping out into the street in front of a car, it's not a bad thing. So.
All right. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 25. Motion authorizing staff to solicit and engage professional engineering services for sidewalk path on Mortensen and Dickinson Avenue. John?
So no new information other than what's in the council action form. One of the property owners is planning to start construction this week. The other property owner is planning to start construction in the next couple of weeks. But what we have in the alternative number one, by authorizing staff to solicit proposals and engage professional services, it will be in the price range from purchasing policy standpoint that staff can approve that engineering contract. So if they do not follow through on commencing construction, then we can move forward with that first step of the assessment project without having to come back to council. So that would expedite then an assessment project to get these sidewalks installed.
Any questions for staff?
John, could you just give us a brief history of just the city's efforts to try to engage the property owners to put the sidewalk in place?
Sure. Just following standard policy and procedures. There's gaps in the infrastructure here because That's typically installed with development. So these lots have remained vacant. Thus, there's been no pedestrian infrastructure installed yet. So we've reached out to the property owners to see in past years to see if they'd be willing to go ahead and put this infrastructure in advance of their development. Some of the feedback we got was that development was imminent on one or more of these lots. So just give us the time. The process will play out the way it's played out historically, and the sidewalks will be installed shortly. Those developments did not come to fruition, did not get submitted. So we're still at the point today where there's no active submittals to develop those lots. However, they now, as the report indicates, told us that they're going to get going on construction within the next couple of weeks.
I feel like we waited a long time for this. There are a large number of people who live in the apartments there, and when the weather is bad, they are really forced into the street and have to walk on a very, very busy street. So I really hope that things will go forward with the sidewalks being put in place, but I'm going to be leaning towards alternative one tonight.
I have one question. That is, if the sidewalks are constructed, for example, if the city constructs the sidewalks, the property owner would still be responsible for clearing them in the winter, isn't that right?
Correct.
And other maintenance that's normally associated with having sidewalks.
Yes, that's right.
Good.
Okay, any other questions?
And they would be assessed the cost of the sidewalk.
And the engineering.
Move alternative one.
Second.
All right, moving seconded. Any further discussion?
Yeah, this is sort of frustrating that we're doing this. I don't want our city staff doing this, but I feel like we're sort of boxed into a corner on this. So I'm supportive of alternative one.
Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item number 26, staff report on status of reinvestment district projects.
I'll try to go over the staff report that was presented. I think later in the day I sent out memos to the city council. But we have some overheads we'll show to the public too on the more important aspects of this project. You recall that the city council authorized the city staff to apply for about $21.5 million in incentive funding from the Iowa Reinvestment District program. You recall that? And it was hoped that if we could receive that amount of money, plus a goal of $10 million from private donations, that we would be able to cover the construction of a new indoor aquatic center. That's with issuing bonds plus the accompanying interest, principal and interest payments on that. In June 25, 2021, we were informed by the Iowa Economic Development Authority that they approved provisional funding grants to a number of cities. I believe we have 5 cities, and we were one of them, fortunately. And while we did not receive the total $21 million, we did receive authorization for $10 million. So we're quite excited about that and grateful that we did receive a substantial amount of money from the state. Now, it's provisional because a lot of the applications were based on concepts. There wasn't enough time to solidify agreements with developers or have actual construction costs. So the state understands that and has given the applicants until February 25th, not a lot of time, but February 25th of 2022 to submit our final concept for our program. You'll remember that you should know that with the decrease from $21 million asking to $10 million, we could have a gap of up to $7.4 million. Now, when I say gap, that means we were not able to cover with the donations and with the reinvestment money enough to cover that total cost. Okay. And I also want to mention that we have a goal of $10 million to date. Dan Cohane's led that and been very successful, but we have a little over $9 million. So we're not exactly the $10 million range there. So I'm going to go over some costs because I think the major point of this report is to talk about the different ways we can finance this project and the cost to the public. because it will require some subsidization now. We will need some property tax funding. So I try to point out there's a number of ways that you can finance what we see as $17 million of general obligation bonds that will have to be issued, right? That's the 27 million total, minus the 10 million donations, leaves $17 million. Now we're going to have to issue the total 17,500,000 about. And then over time, if we do receive, we generate the $10 million from the estimated, monies from the state, that will reduce the net obligation to the taxpayer to only $7 million. Now, how can we do that? How do we issue that $17 million? I've given you at least three options. Cities of this kind, you can issue bonds, GEO bonds, under the urban renewal law. The urban renewal law allows you to actually issue bonds without a vote, right? And it will be subject to what we call a reverse referendum. And according to state law, and it's very cumbersome, and if you read it quickly like I did, I fell in the trap that it sounded like we needed 20% of signatures from 20% of eligible voters on a petition submitted to the city council. But really, if you read closely, and Brian is an expert on this with Mark, it's really 10%. We need 10% of registered voters, eligible voters from the city of Ames on a petition that would be submitted to the council. Another way to do this would then be a referendum election. You could decide that you are going to put this whole $17,500,000 issuance of general obligation bonds up for the public. We've done this before, in swimming pools and city halls. That requires a 60% vote of the people. So you're more familiar with that, I believe, right? Now, to do this, it's a little tricky because the state law does allow for some special elections. The ones that are allowed by state law that are coming up would be in September 14th and March 1st, and the next regular election, as you know, is November. If we talk to city staff, if you're going to go to an election, it takes a substantial amount of time to educate the public to an election. And believe it or not, we're already almost halfway through July. So if we were going to shoot for a September 14th election, I think that would not give us enough time to educate the public. And by the way, you have to notify the auditor at least 46 days before the election of your intent to put election on a bond issue up for an election. So probably the soonest we could do this would be November, the November election, at the general election. If you want to, you might say, why don't we wait till March? That'll give you more time. Well, really, we have to get our application into the reinvestment district by February 25th. And I think they're going to see that it's project ready. In other words, we have all the legal authority to finance the project. So we'll have to have authority to issue those bonds at $17.5 million. So we can't wait till March 1st probably to do this. And then there is a hybrid we talked about a long time ago. And this would make it even more complex for the public because you could choose to issue the $10 million that we hope to generate from the reinvestment district through urban renewal, right through the urban renewal process, and then put up the amount that has to be subsidized with property taxes, estimated now at $7.4 million, $7.5 million through a referendum. I believe when we talk to staff, that's going to be very complex for people to understand, and you probably want to shy away from that. Now, that's talking about how we finance the revenue if we keep the project at the same cost. Remember the $27 million? There is another option there is the cut cost. Remember, that's the second floor we added at the end. We try to lay out in this project here, we could reduce the cost, that gap of $7.5 million down to $2.8 million, or it's about a reduction of $4.6 million off to $27 billion. We're not advocating that. We thought there was a good reason to have that second floor, but I have to offer that as an option for you. That's cutting the cost. Now, I do want to go into, maybe Brian, you can show the overhead. This is in the email I sent you. This is kind of the bottom line. I know the public wants to see this.
Dwayne's?
Yeah, Dwayne's second page. You have a copy of this from. So this is dealing with the aquatic center. Remember, that's just one element of our reinvestment district. application, but 100% of the funding we hope to derive from that source is going to go to finance the aquatic center. I've given you two assumptions. Assumption one's that you don't utilize any of the reinvestment district funding. You don't utilize it. You don't receive it. You're concerned that the estimate is way too optimistic, right? So this is the most conservative approach. What if we received nothing in the way of that $10 million? So that's assumption number one. You'll see we start out with the $27 million project. And by the way, I want to give a caveat here. Every number I'm showing you now, I'm highlighting as the current estimate. As we wait longer, you have to understand we'll know more information about this later on in 3 more months. Dwayne might tell me the interest rates went up. So when I'm going to tell you about principal interest payments, it might go from 2% to 3%. The construction costs are jumping every minute. Remember, this was based on a study we did last year. Has it been last year, Keith, when we do it? It's been that long? And that was based on $22, but Keith's got some other information he'll show you because we touched base with our consulting engineers on this too. But this is what I had before we got updated numbers. So if you take the $27.5 million and you take off, if we reach our goal of $10 million, and you can point to that, Brian, maybe, from donations, that's that 17.5 we need, right? Now, if we have to issue all that, but we assume we're getting no outside funding from the reinvestment district, the principal and interest payment, the current estimate on that is $1,096,000 for 20 years, okay? Based on assumption of a certain interest rate that exists now. That's a principal and interest payment, okay? All of that would have to be then assigned to property tax payments. How will we finance that? You see on there, I show it all goes to property tax levy. None is assigned to the investment funding. Dwayne's estimate this time, and it could change as we approach the election, the cost, the principal and interest payment to the taxpayer is about $18.51 per $100,000 of assessed valuation. Remember how we tell the people how much it costs? So people ask me, this has the principal and interest payment in there. In essence, that $17 million, $17.5 million we're issuing, at the end of the 20 years, we're paying about $22 million. So there's about $4.4 million of interest in there too. We've taken that into account. Now that would cost our levy to go up. It's probably the debt service levy by about 33 cents. Remember, 33-cent levy increase? The 1851 is what it costs per 100,000 of assessed valuation. You can figure that yourself. Now, we do a good job of being transparent in all of our bond issues, and I don't think that's the case with all cities, but we want to tell you what the operating costs are going to be too, because that's going to be a cost of that. After we take out projected revenues, and we haven't figured out a fee schedule or anything, but it's based on the our old project we had before. Interesting enough, we're anticipating maybe up to $400,000 subsidy a year on operating costs. It's funny, our Healthy Life Center was about the same amount. And that's because most of the or all of the deficit we projected for that came from the swimming pool. Indoor pools are very expensive to heat, chemicals for water, and electricity for pumps and such. So I got to tell you what that's going to cost too. Today may go up in 3 months. We'll give you an updated number, but right now we'd have to increase the general levy. That's how we pay for operating costs for swimming pools. It'd be about $6.92 per $100,000 assessed valuation. So if you add those two together, I'm going to do it very slowly. That's probably $26, right? For $100,000 assessed valuation. So if you have a $300,000 house assessed, you multiply that number times 3. Okay? And that will require about a 12-cent increase in the levy, in the general levy to pay for that. Everybody have any questions on that? All right. Now, assumption number 2 assumes that we're going to take advantage of the $10 million, right? Remember, we had an independent consultant look at this and project we can generate about 21 million. And people said maybe we're being too optimistic on that. This is more than half that amount there. So it's very conservative to say we would get about half of that, or $10 million, out of what the consultant said would project about $21 million. So we'll follow it down. You take the donations out, you have the same 17 million. You see that 17,500,000? We have a $1,096,000 principal and interest payment for 20 years again. But you'll notice we can apply $500,000 if it comes out, $500,000 a year, right? For 20 years, get you the $10 million. And then the cost to the property taxpayer on their levy would be $956,000 per year. Do you see that? As compared to the first assumption, the million all going to taxes. So what's the cost of that? If we're able to generate the $10 million in reinvestment district money, the cost of the taxpayer, and by the way, this is based on residential taxpayer, right? I didn't get into the difference, and I can get you that later if you want to go into the commercial and industrial. But just think of a residential property taxpayer. It's $10.07 per $100,000 assessed valuation. It's about a 16%, 18-cent increase in tax rate there, right? The 400,000 deficit stays the same. So it's the same 692, right? So you have about $17 versus the $7 increase. Do you all see that? With a 12-cent increase in rate for the general levy for that. Now, does anybody have any questions before going on further? Because I want to tell Keith, talk to our consultant on the fund, the $27 million.
I have one. It just happens. It's about the state reinvestment monies. Come February, if maybe another community isn't ready, thought they were going to be, do their funds, do those become eligible for the rest of us that have already gotten preliminary?
Yes, they have told us they will reallocate that to other parties. I don't know what percentage, but it is possible. Like if you choose not to apply, our $10 million would go to those 5 entities. You're not going to open up for anybody else.
So it's possible we'd get
Good question.
some of the, okay.
Yes, yes. You can get that money. Now, remember, we're very conservative. We have, is it 74 acres? I keep forgetting, 75 acres in the district. Is that what it is?
We're eligible for
Well,
74.
Remember, we're basing this just on the known projects we have, the hotel, and then the development along East Lincoln Way, and then the Onondaga project, and then we get a little from the swimming pool. Anything that happens in the next 20 years, we can apply for, and actually that'll help us pay off that we'll be able to generate that $10 million faster.
Right.
But we won't be able to get more than $10 million. It'll just be able to pay it back faster.
Right.
Quite frankly, that allows it to go on the books for the state faster too, right?
But if other communities aren't ready with their projects,
We
that
will get it.
submitted, we would get
Yes,
that.
I don't know what percentage they'll do it, but they told us to reallocate.
Okay.
So 2 things I want to go over because let's just talk about the cost. The $27 million, that was the total cost of the project, not the interest cost. Remember, that was the construction cost. And that had all the design costs and the purchase price from the DOT. We had to estimate. We don't have a number yet from them. And the construction costs. So Keith, you want to go over that just to caution the council about the $27 million now?
Yeah. So I spoke with representatives from RDG, and they had also reached out they looked at their recent projects, see how costs are coming in. They also looked at or contacted Stecker and Harmson, who does contract estimating. And then they also reached out to Water's Edge, who did the design for the aquatics portion of the Healthy Life Center. So some of the things that they talked about is right now what they're experiencing are supply issues, material shortages, labor shortages, higher than normal or projected costs, and so on. And then they also mentioned that just a concern about the national infrastructure bill, that if that happens and there's a lot of infrastructure construction going on, that may put be some supply issues with certain materials. But with all of it, they also, what we talked about is from a design standpoint, if we wait until the application is due on February 25th, 2022, and then we start design, at that point, hopefully we'd have all the funding in line and everything, then we're really not going to be starting construction until 2023. Right now, we kind of did a timeline. Bids would not be due until probably January of 23. So what we looked at is they would need to really look at 2023 dollars. So between the 3, RDG, Stecker and Harmson, and Water's Edge, they estimate that inflation could be somewhere between 10 and 15% higher than the 8% that they had figured in. They'd figured 4% and 4%, and that's not including the 2023. But so it could be 10 to 25% or 10 to 15% more. So if you look at that with construction costs and contingency and so on, we're probably looking at on the 10% side, probably somewhere around maybe 2.5 million additional costs, and on the 15% side could be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3.7. And again, these are just rough estimates. I think Steve mentioned early about current estimates. This is just trying to do some quick figuring after I had a conversation with them late this afternoon. But one of the things, if moving forward, what they had suggested is getting together with Stecker and Harmson and just doing a more of an in-depth look at costs and see what would look like. So in the future, we could have a more accurate cost estimate. But for right now, with the information that we have, that's what we're looking at for additional costs.
And that's going to be tricky because it's kind of a doomsday scenario right now. It's a terrible time to bid. In a year, will it be better? You sure hope so. But how do you plan for it right now? All right. That's what we have to plan for, especially if we're going to get authorization under either scenario through the urban renewal or whatever. You're going to have to give authorization for amount of money. Now, interestingly, if you go with the urban renewal area, it gives you more flexibility because if you have to come up with another $2 million, you can issue another $2 million on the urban renewal, the same process. So that gives a little more flexibility. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Remember, I'm using these numbers that were in the report before. We're a little bit worried about that, but we've got a lot of work to do in the next couple of months. This is the beginning, not the end of our analysis. But I want to tell you where we're at. The other issue has to do with the availability of the site. People now are paying attention to us because on June, we finally got indication we have received the money. So it looks like we're closer to moving ahead with this project. So the DOT is now, we're talking to them about not just the cost. I think they're currently engaged in the appraisal, and we don't have that number yet of what they want to charge us, but also the availability of that site because there are people that exist there right now. So what's the latest information on that?
Yeah. So in talking with the DOT today, what they're in a year one of a 4-year renovation project, which includes several buildings that the DOT has. So right now, when look at that renovation project, which it does involve the North Annex, which is the building on the property that we're looking at for the Aquatic Center. When you put that along with other projects, it's very difficult for them to give a timeline in regards to when that site would actually be available. However, one of the things that they did mention is that they are very willing to work with the city and have conversations and really understand what the city's needs are for the site and the time frame, that we would look at, kind of like what I laid out, construction in 2023 and may open in 2024, and look at and share their projects and their needs that they have with all the projects that they have going on, and really sit down and see how we could take a look at meeting both their needs and our needs. So at this point, don't have a definitive date, to say they're going to be done and the site's going to be available at this time. It could be possible that we could construct while the building is still there. But those are all conversations that we are going to need to have with the DOT. And in fact, the individual that I talked to said, depending on council direction, give me a call tomorrow and we can set up a meeting, get the right people there and start having conversations. So they're very willing to do that. And again, in the next weeks to month, hopefully we would have more information that we can share with you regarding, their timeline and when the site would be available.
Just to remind you why this works, the area that building sits on is back in a parking area. Actually, the facility itself is closer to Lincoln Way. So if there's some way we can barricade that off, protect them, but continue or start work early on it, it'll be an interesting type of partnership if we can pull that off. And they can maintain their presence there for time, and yet we can start construction of the building itself. So we'll work on that for you.
Yeah, I will just add that when I was talking with RDG today, I did ask if they felt it would be possible to construct while the building was still there, and they did think that it was doable. And they said also if there was an extra space needed, we're still early in the design. You could reconfigure the building a little bit to give more space if needed. So they felt pretty good, but again, we'll have to have conversation with the DOT and see if that's a viable option or not.
Keith, how many people work there in that building?
I do not know
We don't
that.
know yet. We'll ask.
That
Just curious.
Now, in Dwayne's, I want you to look at Dwayne's memo. It's not as good to put up. It's the third page, but I want you to understand how we cash flow this if you rely on the reinvestment district money. That is not cash that comes into us up front, right? It's earned over time. And as buildings there'll be a delay. We have to issue the bonds up front, incur the debt, right? Pay the contractor, the designers, and then there might be a delay by the time the hotel gets built or some of the restaurants get built to start generating the money back to us. So Dwayne will explain this to you because it's similar to what we do is a tax increment financing, which works kind of the same way. We incur the debt up front and we basically carry negative balances till it pays off. So why don't you explain that?
I think I mentioned in the memo, we would have liked to get a larger award, but the one thing that smaller award does is provide you with some more certainty because, as Steve mentioned, it's less than half of what the consultants had pointed out. And just the first phase of this, the Lincoln Way development, development down the street, Ogundana, I believe, and then the pool also generates about $500,000. That's $16 million between those first phase items. But we issue the bonds right away. There'll be some delay before this reinvestment money comes in. And you remember it's sales tax and hotel motel tax. So it will not be generated until these facilities are done and up and running. So, we could think that now we've mentioned that there may be a delay in the pool, but it's likely a couple years that would pass before you start seeing some significant revenue. With this award amount, we have to put this into a separate fund, and we can let that fund go negative. The city has plenty of cash. We're allowed to consolidate, and we do. So some funds go negative, some are positive, and then we allocate the interest dependent on that. So if there was a delay, we could choose, just like we do with TIF, as Steve had mentioned, we could let the reinvestment fund go negative, whole or spend from that, so to speak. It'll actually come from other funds. Charge that fund interest in those early years, and then it just gets replenished over time. And that's a perfectly acceptable way to do this. Another option, because there's a reliance on the property tax levy, there's enough in that levy to cover all of the interest on the bonds plus a fair amount of principal. So, I think we look at these decisions as we get closer and look at the market, but we could certainly structure this bond issue so that less of the principal comes due in the early years, and we could cover it all with the planned levy that we're going to have anyway, that $596,000. We could just have that level each of the years, or we could look at different structuring depending on when we have bonds due, but there is plenty of flexibility of all the issues related to the things we need to worry about in this project. If the cash comes in, the cash flow is not going to be an issue for the city.
Okay, so before we move on, everybody, any questions on this? This is the Aquatic Center, the funding of it, the cost. I do want to emphasize, or maybe you could help us to clarify, it's always been my understanding, told us that the money we receive from the state on the reinvestment is state money from hotel revenues and sales tax.
State portion of hotel motel and state portion of.
So I want that clear.
sales tax.
It's not decreasing the amount we receive from sales tax or the school districts receive for sales tax, nor, if you're a member of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the amount that we get 7%. Remember, we get 7% hotel motel tax locally. You give 5% to the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and we keep 2%. Remember, 2% for economic development and replace lost sales tax. So it's been my understanding, and they keep telling us that from the state, that it's their money that they're giving us, not taking away and having to redirect our monies to this purpose, to this development. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Any questions on this before we move on to the other projects?
I have one question for Keith. And those numbers from RDG with the 10% or the 15% overage for 2023 prices, was your calculation based just on the construction costs and not including the design costs?
So what I looked at is So the 10% or 15% that they gave us, I looked at that 10 or 15% on top of the construction cost. So
Okay.
that's what I looked at. But when your construction cost goes up, the design fees are roughly 7.5%, so that goes up. And then your contingency is 15%, so then that goes up. So just the 10 or 15% regarding construction, that's what I looked at. And then because those other ones went up. So that does include increases to design and contingency based on the overall construction cost.
But we're going to have to get this tighter because
Right.
we have
Oh, yeah.
contingency in there too. And if you start putting 10% on the contingency, so we've got
we
work to
didn't-
do.
Yeah, we didn't do 10% on the
Yeah,
contingency.
we've got to work on this more.
Yeah, but it was just the contingency, just 15% of the increased construction cost. So
Yeah, to Gloria's point, that's a question I had too, is it shows, I know you were asking questions. I know it's easy to get things mixed up, but they had figured 4% and 4% for inflation per year, right?
Yep.
Were they estimating 5 to 7.5% per year? Or is it 10 to 15% on top of the 8%, which would mean it'd be 18 to 23%?
it's 10 to 15% on top of the 8%. So just Water's Edge, for example, in RDG put 4 and 4. Water's Edge is estimating more like 9% and 9%, and then 5. Stecker and Harmson was so it's on top of the 4 and 4 that they had.
Again, that's based on the market today.
Right. Yeah, which is going to fluctuate, and it could right itself next year. You just don't know.
That's
but-
right. That's the scary part. We don't know.
And the other question is that if council would give direction to them to start sooner on the design and bids could be taken in 2022, is there a possibility of saving some money versus, because usually at the end of the year is when you see construction materials, go up. I mean, is that question posed, or are they just?
Yes. Yeah. So I did ask them if we wanted to try to get some 2022 numbers into this. They felt that the bid would have to go out either late spring or early summer of 2022, because then the contractor would start being able to locking in some of the prices. So, and one of the things though is looking at design is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 8 months. So even if we started, if we wanted to put a bid out in March or April, we'd have to start design almost before the referendum.
Yeah, I would
Understand.
And Dwayne would have to check with the state. Can we start incurring the cost before the project?
Yep.
Maybe they'd let us. I don't know.
Yep.
Before they approve our grant or
Yep. Okay.
our application. Maybe we can. But we have to check on that.
Yep.
Okay, the week away.
One last question.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. It says sort of towards the end of the staff report that if council were seeking the referendum option, it'd be good to start a public information campaign. But do you think there's any value, or just council or just staff think there's any value in doing a campaign, even if we go the urban
Absolutely.
renewal
We're going to be
route
transparent.
anyway?
We've got to talk about the strategy. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I think, that campaign could almost start in either case, no matter which funding mechanism we're.
But it's difference in, I've got a little more time if you're during the urban renewal.
Yes, sure.
Right? We're on a
But you would
tight-
still plan to develop materials and
Yes,
put them
and if
out.
you do a bond issue, usually we work with a friends group, so we get them.
We could still do that anyway.
If you, okay, that's more than just a public campaign. You want a friends group to help you on that too?
I just think it might be prudent.
Yeah, well, we haven't thought about that, but.
Yeah.
Yep. We have more time if you do the urban renewal
Sure.
avenue than
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
Yep, but I think the public needs to know what we're doing.
Yes.
And I think there's a good story to tell here because Amber reminds me of this all the time. We went from the Healthy Life Center where people said it was too much, too costly, and now we're focusing strictly on the Indoor Aquatic Center, of which we're going to lose our only indoor facility. And basically that was a rectangular pool. We're turning it into a family recreation center. People a lot of people were telling me they didn't like the location. They wish we had a downtown location. This is about as good as we can get to get an area that's cleared. We're not taking away existing businesses to accomplish this. It's as close as you can be in downtown.
Or tax-paying.
And it will,
It's not, and no tax-paying.
and it's not paying that. And we're not losing it. Yeah, we're not losing.
Any property tax.
That's
either.
right, because it's tax exempt now. So there's a lot of good stories to be told here, I think. And, well, we'll see what I think the public will, I shouldn't say what the public, my family supports it.
Fair enough.
And if we can pile on it, it's also just a lot cheaper, sort of no matter how you look at it. Because, I mean, the Healthy Life Center, we were looking at $44 per 100K valuation. And now we're looking at, somewhere between $17 and $25.
Right.
Depending on whether you believe the $10 million will arrive or not. And these are the numbers before the increases, right? But still,
Right.
it's just, you can sort of compare the two.
And I think to be transparent as we want to be, I think we should tell the public that the issuing of the $17.5 million, we're going to show them the most conservative number. This is what it could cost you. Whether you believe we can generate $10 million or $1 million, that's going to be gravy on top of it. That's going to lower your costs even more, right? We can't promise, if you don't believe we can promise the 10 million, because there is a risk.
So you'd have a
But
worst case and then sort of a
anything
spectrum up to best
anything
case.
the best case would be we'll get 10 million, but even if we get 2 million, that's going to help us off the quoted price of the
We could
the
get
cost.
more than 10 if other communities' projects don't
that's,
take off.
that's true too. And we'll know that in February, closer to February. So I think we definitely need to educate the public on this. And I think we have a good story to tell.
It would seem appropriate to pin down a little bit this revised number and be using that number. I mean, if costs are gonna go up,
I agree.
instead of just using 17.5, we should be talking about a larger number to be realistic in terms of what the
Oh yeah,
cost is.
that's why I tried to use the numbers we had before.
Yeah, I
I hope I
understand.
indicated they're going to change, and I'll
Right.
come back to you with a better number. And maybe Dan will get us another. He's on board to get us a couple more dollars too, so that'll change. A lot of things will change. But I agree. We
Just
we
for
got to
con-
get the updated numbers.
For consistency, so people don't get confused.
That's right. So I apologize. I'm just using the
I
numbers I
understand.
had today.
I think that was today's news was the,
Right.
so
Yeah.
working with that.
Saying going forward, we want to make sure we have it right. Yep.
Okay, so the Lincoln Way project. This is an exciting project on its own. And remember, we're doing this not just to finance the Aquatic Center. You remember you have adopted a Lincoln Way corridor plan. That was a major development plan you had. And this is really the kickoff to that plan. And that was the high priority area, if you remember, between Duff and Grand Avenue. So this is an exciting project. And Kelly and I, we drove to Iowa City. The Hunziker Corporation is still the kind of lead as the property owner, and introduced us to a hotel developer and other groups that are contemplating working with us now on the project, because everybody's waiting to see if we got the money from the reinvestment project, and now they think it's the real deal. So we just started initial talks with them, and the basic concept is the same. You'll probably they have to do a lot of pro formas before we even negotiate on incentives from us. But you're going to see one of the things they'd like to do is they have a number of requirements for parking. And one of the things they'd like to do is move some of the parking out and put a parking ramp behind Wells Fargo. Interesting enough, that fits with our long-range downtown plan, and maybe turn that facility over to us to operate. And I'm willing to do that if that's truly available, not just for the tenants of the development, because that would be their own parking, but available for people who shop in downtown. And I think that's where we're going on that. So that'll be good. It'll be we'll incentivize it to help them build it. They would probably turn it over to us to operate after that. But by moving that property out, that gave more room to develop more developable property, which generates more revenue for them. So you may see, and this is none of it's been finalized, we'll bring it back to you. Conceptually, they're thinking that they can increase the number of apartments in the development than you saw before, and also downtown office, which is good for downtown, right? You want people to work there, you want people to live there, and they're going to shop there. There's going to be retail and restaurants there, entertainment area. So they're really now going back and putting some hard numbers and seeing what the market will bear and things like that. So there's a lot to do. And we admitted that we have to get this done, a developer's agreement, by the end of December. So there's a lot to do in there. They have to get numbers together. They have to convince us that I can recommend a certain incentive program to you that's justifiable. So and that goes along with everything we're doing with the redevelopment, the Reinvestment Act. So that's what they're exploring there. It's not a radical change. You'll still see an open plaza, which we wanted and was asked for in the corridor plan. So I think it's going to be exciting development if we could pull it off. All right. Downtown Plaza. Now, the Downtown Plaza was placed into the project kind of to show the local match. This is going to 100% from us. And we're going to do this project. I believe you're going to do this project. You've committed to it, even if there's no downtown, there's no investment project, there's no Lincoln Way project. So the first thing we have to do, if you remember, you put money in the budget for the general fund to start a parking lot north of City Hall. Remember that? The first step is tonight. We're going to repay the HUD for that. Now, Vanessa tells us they're going to give us the money back to her to do in programming. That's going to be nice, right, Vanessa? Yeah. She's shaking her head. Yes, she's going to get it back. It's a magician. We're going to give it back, and she's going to give it back. But we're going to have to pay them out of the general fund, which we have appropriated for that. Then we're going to build it, right? We're going to build it. And I think we put in the date here that we hope to get this done by the spring of 22. Complete it. With that completed, that allows us then, with design work and plan, to start the construction of the plaza, because we've got to move that parking out of there and over there. And that could start in the summer. Now, what you're going to see, I think in the next council meeting, we're going to come forward with you. We're probably going to recommend that we waive our purchasing policies and hire Confluence. I think, Mayor, you'll agree they're pretty creative and they came up with a great concept. We'll have we're negotiating for a hard number for them for that design work and construction inspection. And then we'll move ahead with design on that. We can move ahead on that because we're not getting any reinvestment money. We could do that on our own. Any questions on the plaza? Another key part of it, Kelly likes to remind me about artwork. There's three pieces of artwork. One is an interactive piece of artwork, and it's probably worth, they're estimating about $150,000 to $170,000 is built into their budget. And those some other smaller pieces. We'll probably have a separate RFP that will go outside of the construction of the plaza, because we want to deal with strictly the artists themselves in doing that. So you may see an RFP on that in the future too. I just want to remind you. So really what we have in the plaza is about $3.9 million. $3.9 million. But really it's about 3.7 for the construction. And then the other is for the 225,000 is to create more parking. Remember, here outside of City Hall. So with the north parking and convenient parking here, handicap parking, and other kind of parking here, we'll be able to replenish a lot of the parking in the downtown. And we'll have to do design work and see if those numbers hold true. You understand that was based before we're going through what's happening now. So I'm a little worried about that. Now, we are going to come back with you on the rescue plan money and some of the money we may have for general fund availability. We can talk to you about and how we can use that if the costs go over maybe on the swimming pool or this project. We'll have to show you how that could work. Because I'm fearful that 3.9 is not going to be enough either. And we haven't talked to Confluence about that, have we? About 15% increases on that. All right. Any questions on the artwork, the plaza, where we're going on there, on what we're going to do on the plaza? Onondaga, we tried to take advantage of that. That was the one project we were trying to capture money. They were going to do the project. The Nelson family are doing a great job in restoring that. There's talk about, I don't know if they got their plans of doing apartments on top, but even if they don't, the reinvestment money is calculated on the first floor retail space. That's where we generate the sales tax that goes to our $10 million. But if you've seen that, they've done I think a wonderful job of maintaining that building, right? Saving that building and redesigning. So those are the basic elements. I think there's a lot of work to do here, as you can see, for staff. I mean, these are big projects we're going to be working on. And we're going to have to do all this before 1st January with the developers agreement. Again, we're going to have the application in. We'll We'll have to hire that consultant again to relook at our $10 million to verify that based on whatever the new design concept is for our application to be in February 25th. The only decision I need from you, and not tonight, is to think about which of the processes you want to use as far as issuing the bonds, through the urban renewal process or the referendum process. I don't need that tonight, but I don't want to wait too long, especially if you're going to do the election. So maybe as early as, if you feel comfortable, as the next meeting on the 27th, because remember, we'll have to notify the auditor in September. And believe it or not, we're in mid-July. We're almost the fall already. So I want you to think about it. I want the public to respond to the council on this, right? On the avenue, which way you want to go on these. Maybe we could bring it back for you just to give that one decision. Helps us get going.
So I think we do need to make the financing decision as soon as possible, just to give certainty to all of you and to the public. What, I guess, if you're talking about bringing it back at the next meeting.
27th, is it?
Yeah.
You're not doing it. You're just telling us that's the process you want to pursue.
Correct. But, so I guess I have two questions. Is it enough time for you all to gather additional information for us for that meeting?
I'm not going to have that information, but that same information, whether it goes up to $23 million, is going to be under both scenarios. I've got to get to that before. Let's say the state DOT won't give us the property for 3 years. Well, I don't even know if we want to go out with a bond election or even the urban renewal project. Right now, you got to wait, because in 3 years that project cost is going to go up even more.
Right.
We can't wait till the 24, 25. So we're hoping we can work this other scenario with it.
So if we're interested in providing some direction at the next meeting, do you want a motion to that effect?
Do you feel comfortable that you'll be ready by the next meeting? Or what do you think, Mayor? Is that putting too much pressure on the council now, or not how they're going to vote, but you want to see when to bring it back to get direction on the 27th? Is that enough time for public input or public reaction to you think?
So I guess now I'm confused. So we're not going to vote on an action. What would we do then?
No, I thought you were going to make a motion to put it on the next agenda to take action.
Correct. That's what Yep.
My point is,
Yeah.
you feel comfortable to do it then,
Yeah.
or you want to do it at a different time?
Yep.
I don't think anything's going to change.
Yeah.
The numbers will change, but they will change for either scenario you go through. And we're going to have to come back with those things to you. You're not issuing bonds tomorrow.
Well,
either way.
it's really a philosophical question
That's
anyway,
right.
about what direction we want to take.
That's
It's
right.
not necessarily impacted by how much the project costs.
That's right.
So
I think one of the big philosophical question is that council did a phenomenal job of explaining to people that, hey, we're going through this process quickly, to get the application tendered to the Economic Development Commission. And if there'll be some opportunity, if we get the award, to give some feedback. The question becomes, what is an adequate amount of time to allow people to give council feedback? We already have gotten some feedback already from individuals. They're aware of that. So the question is there a way to get a good information campaign out on what we're looking at, what decision is being contemplated in 2 weeks, so people are aware of that, so they can give public input? That's the question. Or is it 4 weeks? I know I'm not trying to drag it on. It's just more or less in fairness to be transparent and let people have a chance to give input. Because really what we're saying is that if one option is that no bond issue at all, it's just issuing the urban renewal, whatever the
They'll be issuing bonds.
The bonds
Urban renewal.
without a vote versus going to and doing either a full vote or a partial vote. Essentially, council's making a decision unilaterally versus asking the public to weigh in on it. That's all.
It's kind of a catch-22. You'll only hear from people who want the vote.
Correct.
Because if they don't want the vote, they don't.
Yeah. Very true.
We're really hearing on the merits of whether we want to pay for a pool or not, kind of not how many times we want to vote for it.
correct. And I guess I would argue too that, as Steve pointed out, that I remind him frequently, with this potential new proposal, I think we have listened to the public. the public turned down the Healthy Life Center because it was too big, it was too expensive, people didn't like the location. There were multiple reasons. We've now come back with a much smaller project on a more central location, and I think that is evidence that we did listen and come up with something that we think will still be a great asset to the community, but that is more in line with what we think will be supported.
So I think 2 weeks is enough time for us to weigh in on that.
Agreed.
Gloria, Tim, and Rachel, what do you think?
I agree. I think 2 weeks is plenty of time because we have started this discussion months ago and have gotten input already. And I know this is out there on Ames People. If you want to get something out into the community, put it on Ames People. So there are people discussing it there. And I think if we push out the information as soon as possible, that 2 weeks is plenty of time.
I'm concerned about the delay and then the gap we're going to have in having a pool. Steve, could you just walk us through best case scenario for the delay that we would have in having an indoor pool?
The best case? No, Keith will help. I don't. You mean when will it be open? Is what you're really asking, right?
So what is the best case potential we have for a gap in having indoor pool in Ames?
So municipal pool, last day of operation will be February 28th of 2022. Okay? So given the scenario that I mentioned earlier with construction starting in 2023, we could be looking at, potentially, if everything goes well, we could open sometime maybe the summer of 2024. That would be a best case scenario. So you're talking a little over 2 years without a municipal pool.
And would we work with the high school perhaps for lessons and things during that interim period?
Yes. Yep.
Right.
Well, we will work with the school district. We also are doing some things with Green Hills. We haven't been able to get back in there yet because of the pandemic, but hopefully in the fall we'll start being able to do some things there, aqua classes, some swim lessons. We do some things at Forker Pool, aqua classes there as well. So the big thing is going to be swim lessons, probably for that 4 on up for that age group. Which is where we either need to go to the school district or we have had some conversation with some of the local hotels already to see if that is an option to do some things in the interim.
Yeah, I've received a handful, and maybe everyone else has as well, just going back and questioning whether this is a necessary amenity for the community. And I think resoundingly, this is an important amenity that a community like Ames should have. And I want to just share one quick statistic that if we look at things like swim lessons from an equity perspective, Black children are not able to swim at 58%. 31% of white kids cannot swim. So there's a huge equity issue here. So I just want to make sure that we think about this from a variety of different lenses. So I think there's a strong, compelling argument moving forward with this. And for the reasons that Amber's indicated, I think we've heard loud and clear from the community on this.
Rachel, any input?
I think 2 weeks is enough time to bring this back.
Okay. You ready?
So, yeah, can I move that we ask staff to put on the next agenda, the next regular meeting agenda, a discussion of the financing options for the aquatic center?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
One last thing, action that we'll be taking is Kelly will be bringing before you the urban renewal area itself, because we have to get that in place. In order to take advantage of the, whether it's an election or not, we're going to have that in place. And that was one of the things we said we would do for the state. And it takes time to do that. So you might see us, I think Kelly will be setting the date of hearing at the next meeting. Is that what we're doing? For the boundaries you've seen before.
Yeah.
And you can withdraw those later on if something happens, but that's another action you'll see coming up.
In the interest of transparency and getting public input, is anyone, I'm going to open up some public comment. Is anyone present tonight that wants to address council on this particular topic and offer input? There will be an opportunity to do it also in 2 weeks additionally. But if you've come and you want to provide any input, you're welcome to do so now. Seeing none, we'll close public input. Anything else, Steve?
No, if you have any other questions or information, Keith, we'll get updated. We'll work with the estimator, so we got to get it as soon as possible. But and then we'll have to make a decision whether we want to assume it's going to be 15% or cut it back a little bit. But I hope you keep some of that money we have in for the rescue fund just in case it goes over. But if you don't need anything else, we'll come back on next meeting for the discussion here.
And we do appreciate people emailing and calling, contacting us, giving their input. It's, council and I read every email and we endeavor to take into consideration what people are giving. And so please continue to do so if you have inputs, pro and con.
And we need to thank Dan Culhane again. He volunteered to help spearhead the raising of funds. So he's done a great job so far. So it's a tough time to raise funds too. And that's not his main duty in life. So we appreciate him taking that time to do it.
Thank you, Dan. This item finished?
It's just begun, but yes.
Well, yeah. Very good
Wish
point.
that was the
All right.
case, but, no.
That said, let's take a 5-minute recess.
Forgot what these long meetings were like.
You spent an hour.
It's like
You've spent an hour on a session.
Page.
To be.
Benjamin, item 27, downtown facade grants.
Yes, good evening. We have.
You need a microphone.
Sorry?
Is it on?
It's
We
on.
couldn't hear you
can
very
hear
well.
talk right into
You got to
it.
be right into it.
Is that better? No.
You have to be right
Oh,
up
right
against-
next to it.
there you
Sorry.
go.
Okay. I went the wrong way. I apologize. We have several facade grants tonight for downtown. This is, we've got 3 projects covering 4 grants. And the first one here is at the very end of Main Street. This is a series of buildings there that are all 1 story. They're all fairly shallow because of where the railroad tracks used to come up behind them. And there's a historic photo in your packet for reference. This property was, until very recently, a barber shop. And you can see the series there. The applicant helpfully pointed out that several of these have already received facade grants, and they are marked there. The proposed facade for the barber shop there at the end will be exactly like those. The one difference will be that the door is going to remain recessed where it is. So there will not be a door opening into the public right-of-way. And this is a rendering of what the entire block of buildings will look like if they all receive facade grants. The next one is up the street. We've got a building that is currently Heroic Hair. It was before that, It's All About Me. And then right next to it, we have the current location for Heroic Inc., the tattoo parlor. So that is what they look like today. Heroic Inc. was formerly a cash checking business several years ago, and this is the proposed facade. And that's so this is actually 2 buildings. They were constructed as 2 buildings. They are separate, which is why it qualifies for 2 facade grants. The current facade dates from the period of significance for the historic district. I couldn't identify exactly when that facade was put on, but it was probably in the 20s or 30s. And the second story is largely untouched, and the ground level, as you can see, looks to recreate in a style that is harmonious with the second story. And the third project is the Sheldon Munn. This is on Kellogg. The applicant is proposing to remove the canopy there above the entrance. This entrance leads back into the lobby for the apartments. Obviously, the Sheldon, I'm sure you all know, the Sheldon Munn was built as a hotel originally. This was I believe this was originally the ladies' entrance there on Kellogg. And the storefront just to the north there, which you can see in the background, is now Noir, which is a cocktail bar. And the owner of Sheldon Munn and the owner of Noir have discussed expanding the operation possibly into the basement of the Sheldon Munn. And the stairs to the basement can be accessed through this entrance as well, which is why the applicant is proposing a new canopy that would look something like this. There is a picture in your packet of what what a similar sign looked like. This one actually was on Main Street. I'll just throw it up there really quickly. So there is historic precedent for it, and the guidelines do allow for canopy replacement, or encourage canopy replacement for something that recreates a historic design. And obviously, there is precedent for this. With this one, we did have more grant requests than we do have funding right now, and so that is why staff is recommending that the 108 main at the end, 209 to 11 main be funded for the full amount, and that this one here at the Sheldon Munn to be given the balance of the fund. And the staff's reasoning there was that this one, the other two, the first two applications are pretty aesthetically significant, whereas this one is a little bit less so. Staff does want to point out that with the one on the Sheldon Munn, the materials that were indicated were not materials that were in line with what they originally were, and the design is acceptable, but the materials should be in line with historically appropriate materials.
Okay, questions for Benjamin?
Just as a question on prior funding, there have been some years where we haven't funded projects on this. Have we been able to roll those balances over?
Yeah, they always roll over. That's why the fund is topped up with 50,000 every year. So there's more than 50,000 in it right now.
So do we know what the fabric of this sign is?
But the original one was?
No, what's proposed?
Oh, the applicant indicated wood and PVC. And staff doesn't have any opposition to the design, but a more historically appropriate material we think is called for.
So remind us, if we wanted to fully fund the Sheldon Munn project, I apologize, that's how much?
The maximum amount that could be granted is $15,000 per project. And then the applicant has also requested $1,000 in design fees. So if the fund were had a bigger balance in it, it could be eligible for a maximum of $16,000.
But I guess what I'm hearing is we're constrained by the fund overall for the facade grant program. Is that true or?
Well, process-wise, we have another 50,000. But does that include 50,000 this year?
So there's a couple of layers to this. So first off, there's not an actual budget for just the canopy. What was submitted was for more work than is eligible. So I can't even tell you what the 50% match would be on. So what Benjamin quoted is the maximum match of $16,000. So you have to put a compliant element on. That's why there's conditions. A canopy is a metal feature. It's not a wood feature with PVC on it. So what's important is previous grants have been given to the Sheldon Munn. So the structure of the program is that first round awards, which are usually the summer or fall. I know we're in the summer now, but this is really a second round award. So you're not using next year's money for this. And your program won't let you even award it this fall to a canopy because it's a second award on a facade that's already gotten it. So it's always going to be at the bottom of the pecking order because you've previously funded work on the facade. So it could be one year where we have no other requests and you could give that money for the future. Or it's something this year where you have multiple requests and now you're trying to weigh what's the most significant, visually significant features that you're supporting with the program.
They already received money on this side of the facade?
Yeah, so it was
not the front.
I think it was 2015.
Thereabouts, yeah.
You awarded multiple facade grants to
Mhm.
work on Main Street and Kellogg.
It was Kellogg too?
Yeah. That was the prior owner that got those facade grants. And we don't fund signs. So that's an important distinction here too, is how much is a canopy and how much is a sign.
Any other questions?
And typically we would expect a metal canopy.
So the guidelines by definition talk about awnings and canopies. Awnings are fabric, canopies are metal. And if you think about the kind of the design on Main Street from the period of significance, they're flat metal canopies typically. So this is a unique one that Benjamin and the applicant looked at to find this different kind of design. I think we need new mics. These aren't working. Okay. Don't hit them. All right. So we believe the guidelines talk about a canopy having to be made of metalwork and not of wood platforms or something else.
Any questions? Ready for a motion?
Move alternative one.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
So this isn't so much discussion as information. I think the facades for the buildings at the heroic buildings, 209 and 211, were put on in 1938. At least I believe off the top of my head, that's when it happened. And the long building with all the little shops was colloquially known as the skyscraper building because it was a skyscraper that was dumped on its side. So,
okay.
And I thought initially that those were the owners of Noir in this photo, but apparently there was no photoshopping done.
All right. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Moving on. Thank you, Benjamin. Moving on to item number 28, resolution approving return of $198,000 of city funding to HUD for city-owned properties. Vanessa?
Good evening. I think Steve has kind of stolen a little of my thunder, but you have before you the agreement to sell the property at 6th Street Properties back to the city of Ames for $198, and we're going to be returning those funds to HUD to be used on our Baker subdivision. And so if council has no objections or any questions, we'll proceed with having that happen. The money has been set aside in the budget in the general fund, and so I verified it was there, so I'm good to move forward with this closing.
Questions for Vanessa? I'll open up public input. Does anyone in the audience wish to address council on this particular topic tonight? Seeing none, close public input. Entertain a motion on resolution.
Move alternative one.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. All right, item 29, hearing on rezoning with master plan 4514 and 4605 Hyde Avenue from agricultural to suburban residential low density.
Good evening, Council. Eloise is going to do the presentation, and we have Tracy Warner here. Tracy Peterson. Sorry for that. And myself also to respond to questions after the presentation.
Good evening. This is a request to rezone the parcels at 4605 and 4514 Hyde Avenue as proposed as Auburn Trail subdivision. You're probably a little familiar with this area. The larger piece was annexed back in 2017. The smaller piece on the east side of Hyde was just annexed in March. It totals just over 75 acres. The property is proposed to be rezoned. It's currently still with the agriculture zoning, as is the case once a property is annexed into the city. And so they're requesting to rezone it to FSRL, and that is a supported category under the land use policy plan, which identifies it as village suburban residential. There's a master plan associated with the property. You have it in your packet. The master plan was based off of a natural resource inventory as required under the Conservation Subdivision Ordinance. It would include at least 25% open space as required. The bottom line is there's approximately 36 acres of developed land that would include a maximum total of 181 acres. And that's identified on the master plan. There's two categories of development. One is for single family attached detached homes. The other is for single family townhomes and small lots. And so the applicant will likely apply for PUD overlay in some of the area. And the property was subject to a pre-annexation agreement back in 2013. And that agreement identified cost sharing of infrastructure. And we believe that that sufficiently addressed the infrastructure requirements for this to be developed. However, we do have associated with the master plan and the rezoning a contract rezoning agreement. And the reason for that is there is some development that's just off-site that we want to make sure is appropriately addressed as part of the development. And so it's a little bit unclear to see, but along this northern boundary of the site, there is a 50-foot swath of land that's in the county. And but we want to make sure that that spine road that's developed actually connects into the future Hayden's Preserve. And so part of the contract rezoning agreement addresses the extension of the two roads north to align into Hayden's Preserve. It also addresses such things as connectivity of the infrastructure into it as well with the shared use path. There's also a shared use path that will be on the west side of Hyde. And there's a piece that is also on the county. So the agreement addresses the extension of that shared use path along the west side of Hyde on the frontage of this property, connecting into where the Hayden Preserve portion and their obligation where they stop. So there would be no gap between any of that. There is one typo in the council action form, and it is correct where we stated that the 10-foot Hyde Park's shared use path would be constructed within 2 years of the first edition being approved. But on page 8 in the addendum, it just says it would be constructed as part of the first edition. So it's actually within 2 years of the first edition. The master plan identifies the planned approach to meeting the requirements of the city's conservation subdivision ordinance. The open space in the development is oriented around a first order stream, wetlands, and natural drainage ways as identified on the natural resource inventory. And it will be subject to being developed under the conservation subdivision ordinance, as I mentioned. So you can see on this master plan where the wetlands are identified, and the orange is where the developable lots would be generally located and clustered around the open space. So the next step, once the land is rezoned, would be for the developer to continue to work toward submitting the preliminary plat. And the preliminary plat will provide the detailing that this does not show. This is not intended to show more detailing than it does show. It is intended to show the grading and some of the context for the property as well as generally where the open space is located. And it has the types of development, and it locks it into not having more than 181 units. And I think with that, I did want to say access to this site, it will be from Hyde primarily. It does have 2 access points that come from the north that will Crestmore and Welbeck will continue north into the development. So the development will be well connected in to the existing network of streets, as well as tying into Hayden's Preserve. And with that, I will open it up to your questions. We do recommend approval of alternative 1.
And then we just wanted to add, I know that there's been questions about the master plan and what does this really mean? So, and then we also had some email input from Dr. Pease that we could answer questions about as well. The master plan, it's an element of our zoning ordinance where we ask basically for the developer early on in the process to indicate their intent for the property. So in this situation, they're asking for FSRL zoning. They're required to, by doing this, to show the types of housing, and they're telling you 2 types of housing are planned here, attached and detached, and generally where are open spaces. What's really unique here is that because of the conservation ordinance, there's extra expectations in the later phase. If we were in another part of town, this is really the guide for how you would see the preliminary plat come in. Knowing the expectations of the conservation ordinance, you can't read this to be that I know it's very precise because you see little fingers of everything everywhere. Ultimately, that's not exactly how it will go with the preliminary plat. There's buffer requirements, there's open space requirements, there's percentage of lots on open space requirements. This gives you a good idea where the developer may like to get to, but the preliminary plat's really going to be defining the expectations of exactly how street layouts work. I would expect the large open spaces that you see here, the areas where you can clearly see there's a lot of slope, those aren't going to change. It's going to be those orange areas and those purple areas, exactly how street layouts work during the preliminary plat. So tonight, when you approve this, you're accepting to some degree that there's going to be detached single family homes on the south side of the site, versions of attached and small lot on the north, and there's going to be open space generally in these areas, but the precise details come down the road here at the preliminary plat.
So it establishes the maximum,
Definitely establishes the maximum.
and then if they have to conform to the
and it doesn't
conservation subdivision requirement, it may eliminate some
Yeah,
lots
so the
too,
master
right?
plan doesn't preempt any other regular zoning standard, nor does it preempt any subdivision standard.
So those specifics on storm sewer will come later on at the preliminary plat, which the council will see.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there'll be a chance to get public input on that specific.
And if there's a requirement imposed by the conservation subdivision planning process that makes it somehow inconsistent with this master plan, then we just fix the master plan or something.
Yeah, we've gone through conceptual review. We haven't had a preliminary plat submitted, nor do we have a final plan for the site. But if for some reason there was a need for more open space, that can be added through the preliminary plat. I think that what would trigger redoing the master plan is if we moved housing from an orange area into a major green area, or all of a sudden we're going to put attached housing everywhere. Then that's a change of use that the master plan didn't contemplate. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but if you're changing unit types or major locations, that's where it'd be hard to make the finding of consistency.
And Tracy's the one who handles that, by ordinance, she'll review the conservation subdivision aspect, the stormwater, report back to you on that. Right?
Yes. We're sharing microphone. We have received some details and been working with the developers on the schematic conceptual layouts and getting some of the natural resource inventory reports. There's still some more to do and more information and more details to be worked out as we move through into the preliminary plat.
Kelly, one of the things that was talked about when we were looking at Hayden or Hayden's Preserve is traffic flow, and they've eliminated, a connection from their main north-south spine over to Hyde. And I asked the question then, is this development anticipating traffic flow coming from the north and getting onto Hyde? Because it's really going to be the only option for people to get into this development and the one to the north, short of going up to 190th Street now. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of, I know it's a traffic question, so it's probably more of a Damien question, but I'm just wondering about long term. Is there going to be problems at this T intersection with people getting backed up and amount of cars coming on here? If you got 181 here, and how many do we have? 300 some up on the other one. I was just curious.
On that half. So when we did Hayden's Preserve, that was a key issue, right? Whether the east-west road went through.
Right.
And I'm not gonna be able to quote the number off the top of my head, but the average daily traffic that Damien did calculate on the spine road that was in the Hayden's Preserve area was well under 2,000 ADT. I think it was under 1,500 ADT. So that's for the whole 24 hours of a day. So that, as you said, a lot of that traffic some's gonna go north and some's gonna have to come down here. And in the preliminary review meetings, Damien has already outlined what they need to assess for turning movements here. So the idea of what's needed for a turn lane on Hyde or a turn lane on the Spine Road, that's a component that'll be addressed during the preliminary plat. So to carry forward what Damien originally recommended on why he could accept the east-west road going away, he didn't forecast on what we knew at that time, nor has it changed with this proposal, that there would be substantial traffic that caused major congestion at an intersection with the Spine Road. It's a residential collector, yeah.
Any other questions?
So you mentioned, Kelly, the letter from Dr. Pease. I was wondering if you could go through some of the concerns that he raised with respect to the handling of the water and the size of the culverts and things. Would you want me to pose those questions, or Tracy, should I ask those questions as they come from the letter, or do you want to just respond broadly to the letter?
Maybe be a little specific since no one else has the letter in front of them.
Sure. Good point. So, so there are three questions that surfaced to me. One is he's questioning the size of the proposed ponds and whether they have adequate capacities. Could you speak to that?
Yes, so conservation subdivision, as well as our post-construction ordinance, they are required to detain back the water to that prehistoric, that meadow in good condition. And so that'll be the differential of what they'll have to detain back. And so the sizing and routing of the pond will depend on what area is passing through, the flow that is passing through. So we know there's some offsite that passes through, whether it's from the south or the east, and then that gets passed through, as well as what is then developed and has that differential to hold back so that we're not discharging at that higher rate. And so we'll see discharge longer because the flows do increase as it comes off the impervious area, but that's why the detention or retention basins are there.
So there's really is some science behind this, that there's a formula and this is something that we use on all the other developments.
Yes,
and it's not done at the zoning stage either, right?
Right. Correct. It's always at the preliminary plat stage or a site plan stage. We have thick stormwater management reports with hydraulic calculations that come to us.
So David's point's well taken. We don't have to worry about the accuracy of those tonight. Those will be done at the next step.
That's right.
And then a second question,
Just to kind of,
please.
That's one reason why you have the master plan. So you have some assurance here that the low spot, this is why you have a master plan. You have some assurance here the developer's not contemplating housing in the low spot of the site. That's kind of the basics of why you're seeing a master plan.
Right.
Is if there was purple or orange down at the southeast corner, I think staff would be saying, I'm not sure this is going to work. But we don't have this, as Tracy said, we can't size it tonight, but we can tell you generally where the right place for it is.
In other developments, we've talked about sizing of culverts, I remember. Could you speak to his concern about how we size those culverts?
When we paved Hyde Avenue, we did have to upsize the culvert that was under Hyde further to the north. This one did not warrant to be upsized, but we'll make sure, they'll be putting a detention facility in that corner with an outlet structure that will be holding it back. And so we will be making sure that that is accommodated with that culvert so that the road is not overtopped.
Okay. And then third question, the size of the grass waterways, that sort of, is that similar to the issue of the retention ponds, that the waterway sizing will be based upon the hydrologic studies?
Yes. So again, we take into consideration the soils and infiltration rates, as well as groundwater and surface water that flows through there. And so it will be, again, considering water that's coming, even flowing, from the south to the north, from the existing detention basin within that you can see there across from the railroad tracks that comes across. There's different areas, and then needing to convey those in the stormwater treatment train. So it's not just one feature. As you see, there are wetlands. So there's going to be swales. There is going to need to be the wetlands enhanced and preserved, and then the conveyance into that detention facility or retention facility, depending if there's existing groundwater levels. And so then there's water in the ponds the full time.
So, and I appreciate that, because that touches on a latter point in the letter, that it's not just the quantity of water, but it's also the quality of water.
Yes.
And so these different features have the added value of improving the water quality as it comes off the property.
And that's why the conservation subdivision was created to protect Ada Hayden and the water quality in Ada Hayden Park. Then the stormwater treatment train is so that there's contact with that water numerous times, so that the water quality can continue to get improved before leaving the site. And then the ponds are for that flood control, so that we're not flooding things downstream. So there's all of those components are in combination with the other aspects of the conservation subdivision, like clustering the homes and the native tree requirements and passive and active recreation within those. We also have buffer requirements. So it's not just the wetland, but it's buffering around the wetland or buffering around the waterways or the ponds to make sure that the homes are not just right up against, say, the bank of a detention basin, because we don't want that.
So one of the things that I've learned as being on city council, before I got on council, I presumed the developments equaled worsened flooding situations and decreased water quality. And it's really been an education for me. I think is valuable for the people who are watching tonight to hear that about all of the thought that goes into these improvements, both to reduce the water going off and the timing, but also the water quality. So thanks for answering Dr. Pisa's questions.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anything else for staff? All right.
Just with the reminder, I think Eloise mentioned that. So there is a little bit unique tonight that you do have a contract rezoning request related to the infrastructure that is essentially off-site. So you have two actions eventually when you get to the motion tonight.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to open up the public hearing on the rezoning with the master plan of 4514 and 4605 Hyde Avenue from agricultural A to suburban residential low density FSRL. And we'll start with, I have two cards here, and then if there's anyone else who wants to address council under public hearing after them, you're welcome to do it. And we'll start with Jerry Neal.
Hi, Jerry Neal, 916 Ridgewood Avenue. I had all these comments, and as always happens, as I listen to these discussions, I end up kind of befuddled. I think that I might have, at the end of this, just a couple questions. So first thing I was going to say was that as a bicyclist, I was so appreciative that we were prioritizing these trail connections as a part of the agreement. And then I just listened to him say, well, yeah, it's not really going to happen right away. It's going to happen 2 years after the first, building gets built. So now I'm not sure where I stand on that bit of praise that I was hoping to offer. I do appreciate that we're trying to keep those in the picture. Of course, the more we move them forward, the better. The second thing I guess I want to comment on is I support the Friends of Ada Hayden Heritage Park, and I listen pretty attentively to guidance that I get from Jim Peace. And I'm also, as you know, kind of turning into, I guess, a climate activist for the group. And so when I kind of read through the report, I felt like I'm listening to this and I understand that a proposed master plan is very general. But to me, it lacks conservation integrity. And I wonder, I get the feeling sometimes that we tack that on to the end of something we've already started rather than integrating it into the process. And I don't know what or how we need to work on those kinds of changes, but it's something that's kind of on my mind. With climate change, I'm thinking of this development and how water will be moving off the hard surfaces and it'll be concentrating all kinds of chemistries and things into water. And we had farmland there and it was, it was washing off, but this is different. It'll be higher flows. And I think that one thing that's happening with climate change is that we're going to have a lot more water. We're not going to have less. And it's going to be moving a lot more in the spring, or so they say, which is the time where land is less capable of letting water infiltrate. It's just not a good time of year for that to happen. And so I'm just wondering if the engineering evaluations of water detention and retention in this proposed development area have accounted for not just historical patterns of rainfall and snowfall and snow melt and all that, but the projected increases in the frequency and intensity of rainfall events in the near to medium futures. So this is coming on us. And if we haven't done that, then the detention and retention of our runoff water is going to be inadequate. And I think it's a valid concern. I think all of us have walked out there in Ada Hayden now, and you can go around the west side and walk through 4 inches of water that's running over the path, and that's fine to a point. If your wetlands have time, that's what they're supposed to do, is hold water, then they let it kind of filter, and then it can overflow. But we can overrun that really easily, and that's certainly a concern that I think that's been raised that's very valid. And so those are kind of things that are on my mind with this that I'm thinking about. And so as a consequence of that, I think that I'd like to see and learn more about it. So I'm an option 3 person for tonight. I would prefer that we get a little bit more information and that I could feel a little bit more comfortable about some of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And Diane McCauley?
I'm Diane McCauley at 4257 Eisenhower Lane, number 10. I'm also the board president of the Association for the Townhome Association that is directly south of the east portion. Right there, yeah. I sent out the information that the council had as their background to the homeowners in our association, and I had a couple comments on their behalf that I wanted to pass on and a couple of my own. I think the biggest concern that some people have is there adequate drainage accounted for, and on the same token that was discussed are they looking forward enough to look at the impacts of climate change? We have had some issues. I can't remember the name of the road, but the name of the road that goes west, directly up high there. We have had a lot of pooling of water in the road there, and a couple years ago it overtopped the curb and filled basements in our development. On the south side of the road, not on the north side of the road, which was really strange. But so we have had some issues with water in basements. The stream, or I don't know if it's really called a stream, it's more like a drainage ditch that's directly behind my house, is about 15 or 20 feet down. So it seems strange that we would have water unless it was an impact from this infrastructure. That stream runs very, very full when it really, really rains. And that's a concern if there's not adequate drainage that is taking place in this development. And it's a farm field now, so it just pours through there. So I guess that's one of our biggest concerns is the engineering, the zoning, conservation zoning, all of those things adequate for future issues if we're going to have more wind, more rain, more snow, or more extreme events. I had a couple people within our complex mention probably an old story for you, but what does the long-term planning talks about choices in housing, and this doesn't look like it has a whole lot more choice. This is going to be another, no more affordable housing, no more different stuff. How can we get some affordable housing for the young people and the workers that we need in town to support our businesses? That's an old story, and I'm sure we can't solve that here tonight, but I wanted to mention that because several people did mention that. I don't know if it'll help or hurt. There's this real speeding issue on Hyde there because they start to leave the housing development section and then they speed up. So I don't know if this will help or hurt, but we've had a lot of issues with speeding and noise on Hyde, and the additional traffic may slow them down, or it may be worse. But that was another concern. And I think there was some mention of a stoplight going in at Hyde as part of that early agreement on Bloomington. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the original traffic study from years ago that allowed for the annexations to occur in 2013, each of the major developments contributes partially to the funding of a traffic signal at Hyde and Bloomington.
Okay.
So when both Hayden's Preserve to the north do their first final plat, and when they do their first final plat, we'll have collected the developer's share, and then traffic engineering can program that light to be done.
Okay. And finally, there was mention of a possible trail from Hyde to Ada Hayden but yet it hadn't been determined where that trail was going to be. And since we have houses directly above that stream, we were just a little concerned about what kind of noise, traffic, what kind of people, how much traffic there would be, and where that trail would be. So those are our association concerns. Now, I spent 10 years or more at the Iowa Department of Transportation working in rail safety. And so I really don't like that this is along the railroad tracks. And there needs to be some mitigating or some safety concerns built into this. Number one, after what you saw happen on Dayton Road, there's definitely some safety concerns. You need to make sure that those houses are far enough back. You also need to have some kind of berming or fencing or something to keep pedestrians and kids from playing on the tracks. And since I live close enough to that, I know that the trains normally go through there at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and those residents aren't going to like that. And those studies have shown that most houses adjacent to railroad tracks lose value because of the noise and safety concerns. So they don't maintain their value as well as those otherwise. But I am concerned that's not a high-use track, which sometimes can be much more dangerous because nobody expects a train. On Duff and Kellogg, everybody expects a train. Everybody is careful. Here there's 2 or 3 or 4 a day, and nobody expects a train. And those can be some of the more dangerous places for kids, adults, and that sort of thing. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Evening, Council. Justin Dodge, Hunziker Companies, 105 South 16th Street. Just wanted to say thank you to staff for working through all the conceptual layouts and the master plan and the rezoning. We've worked with them and received their feedback and are working through a preliminary plat. Hope to have that submitted as quickly as the engineers can get that put together. Our goal is to start moving dirt yet this year, as long as we can get the crews to do so. It was talked about the trail, and so it's our intent, as soon as we do the first addition on the west side of Hyde, we would incorporate and pave that trail right away. And so there was a comment earlier about that. And so the 2 years in our contract rezoning agreement just matched the language from Rose Prairie. And so we just wanted to keep that consistent, but it's our intent to do that right away and make sure that we've got that connectivity for the community. So as you see on the east side, we've got the existing home and then hope to create an additional lot over there. That will likely be, we believe that would be our first final plat. And then the first final plat on the west side of Hyde is when we get that trail built. So happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
I wrote the questions down that they posed. I want to ask staff. The one question I think maybe you could comment on is, there's a question about, is there a trail plan from Hyde to Ada Hayden on the property on the east side of Hyde?
We have been working through a connection in our conceptual layouts with staff. And so.
So the answer is yes.
We would love to, yeah.
There will be a trail that will be provided, a connection point.
Yep.
So again, we're working through it. Parks and Rec has things they would want if that works. So that's why we specifically said don't show it here, because city can't commit to it yet. So I think Justin's explaining it correctly. It's in review and it'll be looked at with the preliminary plat and have an understanding of what, that's when you'll know for sure what it would take to do that.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
So Tracy, some questions were posed. I thought I would just run through them. You talk about when water detention is designed, talk about, several of them about projected rainfall due to climate change in terms of what is the criteria used for hydraulic engineering and what does the city require? And can you just comment on that? I know you're certainly aware of the changes that we're seeing in climate and the amount of rainfall we're getting.
Right. So periodically the standards are adjusted for rainfall. The last rainfall adjustments were made in 2014 as the rainfall and historic and projected were continuing to see those increases. And so with the conveyance is considered 100-year flows, we need to make sure that those 100-year flows are going to safely flow and not impact negatively anybody adjacent to. So they all need to be accommodated. So part of that is also why we have the buffers and the requirements of adjacent to those stormwater facilities that the lowest opening be 3 foot above that 100-year water surface elevation, because those adjustments in 2014, is that enough? So then we also want to make sure that there's some freeboard or that space so that we can not have those waters entering the egress windows or through the walkouts and such. So there are measures that have been taken into consideration. I would anticipate, but I don't know for sure, that those adjustments in 2014 for rainfall events are not going to be the last that we're going to see. I'm guessing that those engineering standards are going to continue to be updated, and we work with the federal government and state governments as those trends are recognized. But right now, I don't have any indication that those rainfall events are going to be adjusted again.
pooling of water over the road, water in basements. Were you aware of this situation in this area?
I can go back and look at our record, and I can have further conversation with Diane. I would appreciate having those. We did make some adjustments to that basin right there on the west side, but it was more for erosion. And in 2016 and 2018, as you all know, we got 6 inches of rain in 2 hours, which was a very intense flooding condition in our community. So it's hard to judge things based on those two extreme events. Yet at the same time, I'd like to have conversation more with her and see if there is something that maybe was clogged or whether we need to address something. So.
Which seems to be separate from what this development is, but just trying to
Yeah,
capture
and
it.
we are aware of the erosion in the waterway on the north side that's on the south side of this east property. And so we had that in the capital improvements plan to fix that erosion. And so what we need to do is get through, their design with the preliminary plat and be working with the developer on that stabilization and figure out what that looks like. And so we'll have a part of that and they'll have a part of that.
And last thing is, I never heard of this rail safe program, which is intriguing. So the point is that to what extent does that enter into a design? And I'm just curious how that enters into it.
It's annoying. Honestly, it's the first time I think it's come up since I've been here. We do not have any specific fencing standards for residential properties along railroad corridors. You can look at Northridge Heights, you can look at Bloomington Heights. And it wasn't discussed with Hayden's Preserve either. So really, I don't have precedent with that in how we've looked at residential subdivisions and Ames.
Right. Does anyone else want to address council under this public hearing tonight? Okay, council, any further questions for staff? If not, I'd entertain a motion regarding the resolution to approve the zoning change agreement. Or to select a different option.
I'd move to approve the contract rezoning agreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
And just to be clear, I'm reading from the council action form here rather than the main agenda.
Thank you. Yes. Alternative 1A.
1A, yeah.
Okay. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Okay, and I would entertain a motion on to approve first reading of the request for rezoning of the 75.17 acre property at 4605 Hyde and 4514 Hyde Avenue from agriculture to suburban low density residential with attached master plan.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion?
I mean, I really appreciate the fact we live in Ames where we have robust questions. I think we get a better outcome. I think this conversation was very helpful. So thanks to the people who raise these questions and concerns. So it's good. Get a better project that way.
Okay, roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. And with that, I declare the public hearing on this item to be closed. Anything else, Kelly?
Just wanted to echo what Tim said. We heard a lot of similar comments. A lot of people, more people actually spoke at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. So I think the developer's very aware now of what neighborhood issues are, as well as staff. And we look forward to the preliminary plat process and working through that with the developer.
Can you just highlight too what additional opportunities for public input there will be as this process proceeds, Kelly?
Right. So as Justin said, they're going to start with the rezoning, has to have 3 readings, so a couple more weeks until that's done. And they're preparing their preliminary plat application. So there will be public notice to the same people that received the rezoning notice for a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for them to, again, have an opportunity to review the lot layout, street orientation, as well as the stormwater management plan. Staff will have evaluated all of that before it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So you'll have our professional recommendations. And then if the commission, when the commission makes their recommendation, then it comes back to City Council for approval usually 2 weeks after the Planning and Zoning Commission, sometimes a little longer if there's other details to work out between the commission and the council review.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Moving on to item 30, hearing on sludge pumping building improvement project. Does council have any questions for staff on this item? All right, declare the public hearing on the sludge pumping building improvement project to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this item? Hearing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Entertain motion on resolution.
Move alternative 1.
Is there a second?
Second.
See what it is.
Sorry. I think that's safe. Yeah, it's usually safe.
You want to read it?
To award a contract for the water pollution control facility sludge pumping building improvements project to Woodruff Construction Incorporated of Ames, Iowa, in the amount of $369,700.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Moving on to disposition of communications to council. There's 2 items. First is a letter from Jody Stumbo, Bridge Home Executive Director, proposed annual action plan follow-up. It's just for information.
I'm not sure there's a question there. Is there? It's just information to you. Right?
Yep.
Question? Yeah.
Okay. And then second is a letter from Kim Fry, Ames Main Street, regarding implementation of an overnight parking permit process for all metered or lot spots within downtown district.
Yeah, I think you referred to us, but you can refer this one too. We met with him on that issue, so want to refer to it.
So it sounds like you're already aware of this issue and in touch with them.
Yeah, they came. We met with him as follow up. But you can, for officially, why don't you refer it so we get it on our books?
Move to refer.
Second.
Okay. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right, council comments. Trevor.
I do not have any comments tonight. Thank you.
All right. Rowan.
Nothing for me tonight. Thank you.
David.
No comments tonight.
Amber.
Nothing for me.
Rachel.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Gloria.
Skip
wanna go to
right
Tim
over.
first?
It's all right.
I know
It's
he
all
got-
right.
He's got some.
That's what he's doing.
I know he's got some. I don't want to steal his thunder.
All right. Well, Tim, go ahead.
If you're sure you're ready for this.
I'm ready.
All right. So, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, I would have a motion tonight. So, pertaining to 190th and Hyde, and I'm open to suggestions, but let me try this as a motion. I move that we ask staff to examine, well, we already have a referral already on speeding on Hydes. So I'm asking the staff, in addition to that, look at whether there would be some important traffic control measures that we could consider for the intersection of Hyde and 190th, both temporary and long-term. And then in light of the county's interest, I would ask that we would coordinate with Story County in this discussion. And finally, we look at to see whether there are any short-term measures that could be put in place before school starts.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Just to have clarification, I don't know what it means to coordinate with. Usually we get a report back to you all. I mean, I think I know what they want. They just wanted to accelerate the deal. So I don't know.
So I apologize. I don't know what we do in terms of reaching out to their staff to see if they have input. I guess that's what I would.
They want you to make improvements there faster.
Well,
so I mean, that's what they want.
I guess I'm asking.
And the first
staff
step
to-
is you want to accelerate, see if we accelerate the studies. That was their first question. Remember, there was a question to move that quicker. And what we have to report back, what we would trade off for that. And then you do the study, and then you'll come up with the big options for capital improvements. Then you'll have to decide how to finance it.
Correct.
If we have to wait 3 years to get federal money and they don't want you to wait 3 years, then you'd say, oh, do you want to make up the difference in the federal money, or do you expect the taxpayers of Ames to? So I think the first step is you want us to look at accelerating the studies. Remember, they were in the second year of the CIP.
Correct.
But you have to know whether there's workload capabilities that Damien can do it, or if he can, what is he going to have to give up and switch, delay to flip flop, to put back? Because I think it's your first step to see you get to accelerate the study.
John, do you have any other input based on your
well,
conversations?
that's one item. And the other item is that are there temporary measures
temporary
measures that could be implemented, such as stop signs or other things? And I think that, just for Damien to reach out and just talk to their staff not the supervisors, but don't they have like
they have an engineer
and just talk about, because she mentioned during AMPO is that they put a stop sign up there for a while and it didn't work. And so the point is that it's just trying to show, it's just some collaboration. I'm not saying ask them to tell us what to do, but just, working together on that. But I think the main concern is the potential for a really bad or fatal accident at that intersection when school starts up again, because Hyde's become a thoroughfare now that it's paved. So instead of something is short term to protect the intersection right now, and then knowing that long term it's going to take longer to get that point. So it's really a two-pronged motion, so to speak.
He got the first one. You wanted temporary controls.
Correct. I mean, just at least to consider it.
The second one is the work on the recommendations to accelerate the study, right?
Correct.
And meet with county staff to go over this.
Well, I think the county staff is really just the temporary, isn't it? Not the.
Oh, it's not the full.
No, it's just a temporary. It's looking for solutions to try and help with the temporary.
That's what I heard from Linda tonight.
Yeah, knowing that everything else, that the permanent, that's in the city's realm.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah,
I'm back. I had it backwards.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah. Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anything else, Tim?
Yes. So last Saturday night was the 50th running of Midnight Madness. So congratulations to Brett Carney and his team for pulling off. The weather was supposed to be crazy, and the weather held off, and it was a beautiful night. And so a tradition continues. So thank you, Brett. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
We heard tonight from the Human Relations Commission that they're going to be working on expanding their engagement with the community. And I think that fits right in with some of the things that Steve and I have been working on with the class from Community and Regional Planning. And I'm hoping we can maybe find some ways to use that as an effective partnering. But I also know that we have a couple of gentlemen in the audience here who are part of a SciStarter program who are working on mobile engagement in communities. And so I would encourage them and maybe the Human Resources Commission to talk to each other about this type of engagement, which is it's an informational engagement, but it's really important to so many of those underrepresented communities and those who are feeling that they maybe are being treated unfairly in their workplaces and housing situations, et cetera. So I was happy to hear that report and that we're going to have some more interaction going on. That's all I've got tonight.
All right. Well, I just, once again, back to the proclamation, you're so blessed to have like 38 gorgeous parks in our community. And we had the dedication of the LED lighting at the band shell last Thursday night, which is exciting. And it's just, and we had a lot of dedications this year. So it's just nice to have things going on outside.
More to come.
And more to come. Absolutely. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you.